Matthew. So happy to welcome you to the show.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
For those people who are not aware of who you are, Matthew Egol, founder and CEO of Journey Spark, best-selling author of CX and Culture Connect, and also a host of the same podcast. And the reason why I'm interviewing you today is because I know you're a humble guy, but I think arguably you are one of maybe the world-leading experts in regards to the intersection between customer-centric thinking and culture. And I think one of the topics that hits the world right now, more than anything, is that we are in a culture war on so many different areas around the world. And where I feel blessed and privileged right now to learn a little bit about you, about your work down the line, and maybe even how we can fix the current crisis that we have in the world, where we either don't understand how to create the right kind of culture or how to negotiate and live alongside people who have a different one. Right? So I'm happy to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope to um, spark some great ideas for the audience. It's a real honor to be here.
How did you come up with the name for the company? I feel like that's always something I'm interested in. Right? It's like for Journey Spark, it's like I like the words that you use.
So, Journey Spark, um, I was brainstorming names with my wife and her sister, um, Alana and Mara, and we were talking about names and what was meaningful to me. And ultimately, what sparked this idea is that I wanted to focus on how customer experience and culture come together. And I think of there actually being three journeys, which is why I picked the name with journey in it. The first journey is the one a lot of people focus on is like either the customer, or employee journey, right? So like the customer journey, you can analyze it, you can build personas, you can build customer journey maps or things you can do to understand. And people talk about walking in someone else's shoes or seeing the world through someone else's eyes, which builds insights and understanding and empathy to like walk in other people's shoes. Mentalism is the practice of imagining what other people are thinking and feeling, which is the first step to connect with others, right? So first journey is the customer journey. The second journey, it's a layered metaphor, is the journey a company is on to be more customer driven. So I'm sure we'll talk about this on the podcast in the interview, that every company is on a journey that the leaders can steer and collaborate on. And I talk about a journey towards your purpose, towards your mission and vision. That's a journey you can explicitly manage. So I want to be a guide and a partner on my client's journey. That's meaningful to me. To be customer driven, to have a culture of collaboration, of experimentation, of agility, of quality, culture of something meaningful. And that's a journey you can explicitly manage with many steps in it, and it takes effort and attention, and leadership. And the third journey is the journey of your employees in your company. They're on the journey too. And so really I'm focusing on the intersection of leadership experience, customer experience, and employee experience. There's three journeys of the company, the customer, and the employee. And I'm trying to spark ideas and energy, because creativity is energy. A company is a living organization. It's a living thing. And culture is all about the flow of energy. It either brings your energy up or your energy down. So I'm trying to spark. The metaphor of a spark is not only the innovation metaphor, but boosting the energy of the organization aligned to its purpose.
That's beautiful. And since you and I are going on a journey, it's like one of the things that I'm really interested is not just what leaders do, but who they are and how they became the person. And for me, like my entire company is about conversations, collecting them through different forms, whether this is master classes for more leaders, podcasts like we are doing right now, or even AI agents down the line. I feel conversations can spark epiphanies that provoke behavioral change. That's
Mm-hmm.
something I learned from one of my mentors, BJ Falk, when I was working with him. Just shout out to him. And since you and I are going on an adventure, and I'm a big travel guy. It's I met this one person, and he had this habit of exchanging a little bit of embarrassing stories before you go on an adventure to spark some trust between you and the other co-travelers. And I did some research. There was, I think it was one of the earliest documented kings of the Babylonian Empire. They had a ritual where once per year, the king had to pretty much confess all the shit he did and lower himself back to the people. And I feel like we have a climate right now where there's no much room for authentic humanistic approaches to showing what we really are. And I thought like maybe it would be cool to just start this conversational adventure with sharing like a little bit of an embarrassing story from each of us.
Let's be vulnerable together.
Yeah, that sounds ridiculous in a way. My boys are gonna make fun of me. I'm gonna start. The entirety of the podcast, we are gonna be accompanied by something. I have a pimple between my two eyebrows, and I tried to fix it. And now I showed, because I tried to fix it, it's now red. So if you think at some point during our conversation I'm growing a third eye or getting illuminated, it's just me not having the best timing for my personal hygiene in a way. So that's my little embarrassing thing, because that's gonna stay in the internet forever. So I'm just gonna attack it first before I get a mean, vicious, but rightfully adjusted YouTube comment.
Oh, that's funny.
Anything that you say, like that's a story that captures you in a light where you're not perfect or something like this from your leadership journey, a mistake you made, or like a particular favorite failure story or something where you made it for yourself.
I'll share some training I've had that like I learned from this experience in so many ways, Daniel, that and one of the things I learned along the way is this training I got on my way to partner. And at first I thought like, why do I need this training? What is it that I need to fix? What is it about me? When I learned is one, that it's a part of your personal growth to acknowledge things that you want to work on and get better at them, but also that more than half the people who made partner had gone through coaching and training. So it was actually not a bad thing, but it helps you be better, right? So it's the basic principle that often your strengths become your weaknesses. And often and the same thing is true in culture. And this personal experience, actually had an impact on the way I think about culture, that often you overplay your strengths. So I needed training on listening skills. Now you'd say, well, how can you be a podcast host? How can you be a facilitator, a coach, a consultant, if you needed coaching on listening early in your career? Well, because I got a lot better at it because of the coaching, because I became much more self-conscious of this. Now, what did I need listening coaching for? There's different ways. It's a pretty broad general comment. It was not all listening skills. I had a tendency to listen to the content of someone's comments to see whether I agreed with them. So when you're talking to me, I would be focusing on whether I agreed with what you're saying. And then what does that mean? That means I'm not fully present when you're speaking because I'm listening to the content and I'm not acknowledging your feelings enough, your body language, everything between the lines. I was focusing on whether I thought you were right.
Yeah.
Not only that, but I would be thinking about what I'm going to say next. So I wasn't fully listening because I was focusing on whether I agree with you and whether I was going to say something else next. Now, what happened if I did that? I interrupted. I got excited about, oh, I see what they're saying and I already know what I want to say, and I would interrupt someone. Not all the time, but sometimes. And I had to work on that. And I had some very basic coaching that one of my partners who I shared I was going through the training, this is before I made partner at Booz and Company, which was later acquired by PwC. He called it red light, green light. If someone else speaks, you immediately stop talking. If someone's talking, you don't talk. It's pretty obvious. Like once you think red light, green light, it's pretty obvious to look for the clues. Oh, someone's talking. Now, what you really want is to become unconscious, a habit. So you don't have to think about it, right? But that was a very easy device for me to be self-aware and focus on that. And I really practiced like focusing on emotion. And I actually became like very, very engaged on understanding emotion. and how it impacts our decision making. And I also learned through all the work I did with culture over the years and in my interest in it, that culture, often your strengths become your weaknesses, that organizations have traits which build up over time based on their founders and the team members, and they reinforce behavior. And then what ends up happening is the positive behaviors and the negative behaviors around those traits, the negative may end up becoming overextensions of strengths. And then the negatives grow. And that's why there are certain negative behaviors in an organization. They're usually a manifestation of an overplayed strength that's grown over time and gotten worse and like calcified. And then the way to remove that is to focus on positive behavior and crowd out the negative and reverse the trend. But it helps build insights into why those behaviors emerged in the first place. Just like an individual will overplay their strength, in my case, it was like I was very, very good at understanding the content of someone's ideas and how to argue against them or for them, which undermined my emotional empathy. And I had to fix that. And now I pay a lot of attention to emotion, which is really how our brains work. 95% of what we do is actually emotional versus rational. And that's actually a good thing because it makes things easier and effective for us.
That's such a beautiful point. I also love how, in a nutshell, it's one of the many things I enjoy about podcasting is being mostly the stupid guy in the room. It's like it's a fun experience to me, and I love how I'm sharing a couple story, and you have this deep philosophical approach, which is, I think, is the fundamental truism of what good leadership is. I think good leadership is you have a corporate or you're leading a company or an enterprise or a relationship, and you're a service listening based attitude where you think, what can I do for them? And I think like bad leadership has in common that it's like you're seeing your subjects, your employees, your members, as tools to ascend you down the line. And one of the skills that is impossible for, I think, for instance, like a corrupted individual to manifest is true listening, because it requires so many characteristical foundations where you take yourself out of the equation and just be with the other person and open yourself up to the idea that they might have something to say that you don't know. And that it's beautiful, actually. Do you feel we lost that? I watched recently this great movie. I'm always a little bit skeptical of these histodramas where they depict great leaders of the past. So I feel like there's a lot of fiction sometimes in it. But there was one I watched was The Darkest Hour about Winston Churchill. And it was like he had this crisis of we had to deliver a speech pretty much. And one of the scenes I liked was where he was in the London subway. He was talking to people and asking them what he should do. And I feel like right now, one of the reasons, particularly in Germany, where I'm from, why people are starting to scream is because they don't feel heard anymore. I feel we lost that thing. Where we are in the world with this?
So I think this shows up in many ways in the world today as like the paradox of like, how can you have so much information and so much knowledge in the world and then we lose some basics, right? But like, because people don't write letters as much, the art of writing a letter or the art of just conversation or the art of enjoying a quiet moment, even whether it's alone or with other people, we're constantly inundated with experiences, which can be a good thing in that we have so many things we can enjoy in life and so many more like options and blessings. But we're constantly inundated with, we talk about social media or the 24/7 news cycle or the number of emails and texts you get in a day. And like, I once, there's a slight detour here, but I once was talking with a partner of mine who I witnessed like using every last second before the flight took off to send like text messages and emails to people, which then beget more text messages and emails back. Right? It's like, well, actually, sometimes it's better not to inundate with messages and content and like just pause and slow down. It's like slowing down to speed up.
Yeah.
Sometimes sometimes a message actually is not an immediate expedient. It's expedient.
Yeah.
Like I'll send an email right now, But like I've witnessed this with other people, and I try not to emulate this, like the rattle, rattle, rattle of constant emails without even giving people a time to reflect and answer. And like all of a sudden you've hit them with another email 15 minutes after the last email.
Yeah.
Like slow down, have a conversation.
Yeah. I'm actually considering cutting email completely out of my communication pattern because I realize
Mm.
it's for me, it's not that effective anymore, if I'm honest. It's like it's
Yeah.
whenever I start negotiating over emails, it's like I feel it causes more division than bringing the people
Well,
together.
the people have a really hard time reading beyond the content to the emotion over email. They either make assumptions about it that are not present and they're in reading into it, or they literally can't, they don't know what the emotion is and
Because
they assume.
you can't listen what you said earlier. It's like in what tone somebody was saying something. It's like what setting is he communicating with you, and that's couldn't agree more to that. Speaking of listening, if you would listen to your autobiography one day and you would describe us the first chapter of your life, how it all began for Matthew, how would you describe this? How did you grow up?
So in the intro to my book, the CX and culture connection, I do go a little bit into my backstory, but you've asked me to go even deeper. So I'm going to go even further back in my formative things, which I think is your intent of the question, not just like in my professional days.
I think if I would love to take credit for this, but usually my questions they are a spark in my brain rather than they are thought out thoroughly in a way.
Mhm.
For me, it's like about learning, investigating together how Matthew was created in a way. So like that's why
So I'm going to tell you some personal stories, and you'll tell me if this is too much information because we have a lot of time to chat
we
together
got
now.
time. So it's like
Yeah, so I'm gonna avoid some of the effort to kind of condense because we have a little more time here.
yeah.
Um, so if I go back to my it'll give you a sense of like some of the things that I think drove me early on that continue to drive the way I think.
Yeah.
Which I believe in my personal values. What I really care about is self-expression, freedom, collaboration, helping people realize their purpose. Now, but for me, that's always meant that I valued like a liberal arts education. I valued personal, like intrinsic motivation to take charge of your own education, to take charge of your own learning. I feel like it's and also that means I can be a little bit sometimes of like a skeptic and pushing back and don't naturally accept authority, and that I want to question things before I accept them. So my demeanor is to like want to probe and question, and believe that I have the agency and right to question things. But one thing I've learned over the years is to be more humble and recognize that a lot of times you don't know enough to know the right questions to ask. So slow it down and try to get other people's voices and opinions about what are the right to collaborate. But my value system, and I'll go back very early on and tell you a story I don't often tell people until we happen to get into this subject. It's not something I bring up right away, but I will now that we're on it. When I was 8, um, I was thinking. I remember being on my bed in my bedroom, thinking about like, why am I forced to go again? Right? And I was like, well, because my parents want me to, and it's the way I'm being brought up. And I went to my dad, and I said, and my mom, but I said, why do I have to do this? And they said, well, you need to learn your culture so you can make a decision later or not if this is something you want to do and embrace. Okay. And I said, well, if there is a God, then God would know that I'm only going because you're making me. And that and he would be able to see he, she, whatever. I didn't necessarily assume gender, but God would be able to see in my mind if God is omnipotent and know what I'm really thinking. And therefore, why can't I just have a relation directly? Why do I have to have organized religion? I was 8. Okay. But this was important to me. This idea of having self control and being the one who decides what's true. And I also like part of what was driving my thinking was I was very interested in mythology and things later into like tween years and like I said, well, if there were cave paintings and there were mythology, then all of this was man-made. And then, like, what's true? What's not true? Should I believe it just because I was born a certain way? And who's the arbiter of what's true? So my value system was, it was up to me to question things, but engage with people I respect in conversations about what's true, like my parents, my teachers. But all the way through school, now I was a difficult kid in like second, third, fourth grade because I questioned everything. And then I remember being like in the hallway in like third or fourth grade because I was difficult with the teacher. And my mom sent me to a private school, my mom and dad. And I really embraced learning. And that was a good moment for me, but I actually became a really strong student. But like there was a moment where I could have gone the other way.
Yeah.
But it was because I was very, very much focused on myself as the one who could ask questions. Now, what I had to learn, Daniel, is that like it's important to recognize the limits to knowledge. Like, Socrates, the wise man, is the one who knows how much he doesn't know.
That was the first thing I was about to grow up. Like I wouldn't even use the word difficult. I would have used the word Socratic. It's like
Yeah.
there was a reason why they tried to kill him. He was questioning everybody and everything around him.
So I learned. Now, I'll take that forward to my college days. So I went to Dartmouth and I chose a liberal arts school for some reasons that'll probably make sense given what I was just saying, because I value diversity of ideas, debate, seeking knowledge. That for me, that was like meaningful and important to like believe that the beliefs I was shaping for myself, I viewed it as actually creating my own belief system and choosing the courses to take as like, and that could be arrogance that I believed I had to be right and pick the right things to believe. And that so when I was in college, I actually, at first I thought I would be a philosophy major because I would read philosophy books when I was like in high school for fun. I was a bit of a geek that way, but just so you don't think I'm a complete bookworm, I was also a wrestler, a soccer goalie, and a lacrosse goalie, right? So like I played 3 seasons. I actually won the state tournament in wrestling. So I wasn't just like a bookworm.
Yeah.
Right. And I was driven to be successful there. And when I won, the coach said that I outsmarted my opponents. So like he didn't talk about my natural talent. It was about my technique. Right. It was funny to hear the speech he gave when I won. I was like, wait a minute, you're saying I did it because I tricked the other guy or I outsmarted him, not because I was good, right? But I lost every single match in 7th grade when I first started wrestling. I was 100% defeats my first year. But I was
defeats in your first year.
I lost every single match in 7th grade.
How did Magic keep being in love with the art of wrestling in a way?
Because I felt like wrestling is a very primal sport. It's about you versus the other person and who's in control. So actually, I'm thinking back, reflective on, I think wrestling was a great, and soccer goalie. It's up to you. Yeah. You can be the hero or the villain. Like it's like you're in it. For me, I think it was a search for control, self-reflection. And proving that I could overcome my limitations, that I could become a good athlete if I worked hard enough. I was never going to be like the best because of my natural abilities, but I was able to get to a pretty high level just by working. I would do like extra conditioning, extra training. I would go to summer camps. So I went to college, and I thought I was going to be a philosophy major, and then I decided, you know what? I actually remember a conversation with one of my philosophy professors. I was taking a course in theory of knowledge as an elective. Well, it's one of the courses, and that potentially would have been a major. For me, it was an elective because I ended up being an economics major, but it would have been a core course for the philosophy major. And it was all about what is knowledge, its justified true belief, there are different theories of knowledge. And justifying whether you can actually know something. It seems kind of silly. You'd have to ask, like, of course you can. Like, there's something called externalism as one of the theories of knowledge, which is you believe there's knowledge because it works. Basically, it's probabilistic. But you can't actually prove that it's true with theory, but you believe it because it works, which is the way human beings are, right? Or it's coherent. You believe there's knowledge because it all hangs together really well. But ultimately, if you follow the thread of the course, it leads to skepticism. And the professor would say, be a West Coast skeptic, not an East Coast skeptic, because an East Coast skeptic pulls out his hair and says, oh my God, there's no knowledge, I can't justify it. And the West Coast skeptic says, there's no knowledge, let's go surf. Right? So that course, I had a conversation with the professor about like, what is belief? It's binary. How do you get to belief? How do you get someone who doesn't believe to believe? You have to be vulnerable. You have to take a leap of faith.
Yeah.
He said, what you're interested in is psychology, not philosophy. So I actually started.
You think he was right? Because my question for you would be, do you think we choose our beliefs, or do our beliefs choose us?
I think it's a combination of the two. Yeah. I think you can go through life exerting more influence and self-reflection.
Yeah.
Just like we talked about mentalism, thinking about what others are thinking and feeling. Well, self-reflection, you can think about what you were thinking and feeling, right? It's being self-aware. But 95% of what we do is unconscious. And you can't be fully aware on your own. And you can go through lots of therapy and like try to understand yourself or talk to others to get to understand it. But the human mind is very hard to penetrate. But I was on a quest, a journey to understand myself better. So I went from philosophy to psychology to economics. And my interest in economics was actually behavioral economics. And the economics professors would say, you really are not going to be a good economist because you care too much about what people actually do. And I said, well, isn't that the whole point? If people are doing things for emotional or rational reasons, isn't that like what we should ground our theory in, rather than like assume it's perfect? Yogi Berra had a great quote that I love. He has a lot of great quotes. He said, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is.
Yeah. Say that again. I think I need to grasp that.
That's a lot of Yogi Berraisms are really deep and like they sound obvious. Like he also said, you observe a lot by watching. Okay. But
talking about listening from earlier, for me, for instance, listening is very little to do with my ears. And more you listen with your mind, your heart.
100%.
Even like you mentioned Socrates. How Socrates listened is the most accurate form of because he pretty much like he just depicted it that he wasn't the wisest person, but he had a covenant with his conscience, which was this daemon, and he would consult him like an oracle, but it would always only speak up when he was about to do something bad, like stray away from probably meet somebody who isn't properly configured in a way. So it's like he had this idea of that listening is not just like a linguistic exercise, but it is much more deeper actually than that.
Yeah, and I think ultimately we want meaning, and we connect with other people, and we have emotionally engaging, hopefully, experiences that create meaning. And memory is what's meaningful. Like we filter out a lot of things in our memory. So if you take the customer journey as an example of this, there's something called the peak end rule, which is you remember the peaks and the last thing. And I would argue the start too, but basically the peak end rule says things that are really strong, emotionally engaging experiences make it meaningful for you, because the operating the system of our brain is actually emotion. And if we have strong emotions, it etches the memory in our mind. The emotion actually makes it more memorable. That's part of what we remember, is how we felt. And that makes it memorable. And you filter out everything else. And so you remember the peaks and the last thing. And that's the way we store memory. And the more you have positive experiences, you actually crave that feeling. And loyalty is a habit loop where you just want to feel a certain way. And a brand that you're loyal to helps you feel a certain way about yourself. So you're loyal to it. So that's what emotion is actually. A lot of decisions are made because they're habits. And habit is driven by emotion because you crave a certain feeling. And in the rawest form, it's chemistry and physiology, but it's that emotions are basically something we want to feel. So Lou Carbone said, one of my mentors, he created the phrase experience management, and I've had the privilege to work with him over the years. And Lou says that customer experience is how you feel about yourself going on the journey, and brand is how you feel about something else, right? So when you describe a brand, people tend to focus on the attributes of the brand or the descriptors of how you feel about the brand. And a brand has good equity or strong brand health, if you use more positive language to describe how you feel about the brand. But actually, what really matters and makes your experiences with the brand memorable is how you feel about yourself engaging with the brand and with others. And in many cases, like I'll give you a construct that is in my book called the Experience Collage. And you'll notice that the book's cover has artwork on it, which is collage.
Yeah, tell me. And this
is
has a special story. Tell us a lot about that too, please.
Yeah, so this is my mom's artwork. My mom's a collage artist. So I have a lot of influence in my life talking to my dad. And I'll say why he was a hero to me and had a lot of influence. My relationship with my dad had a lot of influence on me. He was a partner at Arthur Andersen, who retired before the company went under. But he was a bit of an idea guy. He was working on innovating the accounting model. He was working on how to apply accounting in government and education. He started out more on the audit, and got more into consulting and innovation. But we had a lot of discussions around ideas and later around business. And when he passed, it was a big gap for me in my life, not having those conversations anymore. My mom's an artist. And so, I grew up with a business thinker and an artist who had a wonderful, loving relationship. And my mom, as a collage artist, I actually picked up on what collage is, which is about layers and about putting pieces together that add meaning as you add layers. And it clicked for me in a conversation once that this is actually how customer and employee experience work. They're collages in our memory. And you're constantly adding to the collage in your memory. And it makes it meaningful and memorable to you to interpret your own collage, which is constantly changing. It's like a river of images. And you can try to understand them. Now, collage is also often used for what's called deep metaphor analysis, Daniel, when you do in psychology, which is if you want to ask somebody and uncover unconscious thought, if you use words, you're actually tapping into the rational 5% of their brain that's rational. If you really want to get at unconscious thought and what's real, because a lot of times what you're in the rational state, you're rationalizing what's below. And it's not necessarily accurate of what's below when we use rational thought. So when you use collage and metaphors, so for example, if you ask somebody rather than to write a paragraph to pick an image that speaks to them of what the meaning is for something, it actually helps you connect more directly with emotion and what's below the surface, because most of what goes on in the brain is not language based, it's image and emotion based. And so images are actually deeper more likely to connect with the true underlying meaning of how people feel. So let me give you an example with a brand. The brands like, I'll use some insurance examples because they're easy metaphors to get.
Yeah.
State Farm, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Yeah.
Prudential is like a rock.
Yeah.
Right? You're in good hands with Allstate. What are the metaphors that they're using?
They are archetypical, right? So it's like they are deeper than even your experience. It's like how I see the mind a little bit is as an agentic culture where things exist even before you. Like other people would call that instinct, but like I have a even before I make any experience in my life, I have a template of what an enemy is, what my mother is, what my father is, what a friend is, what it, and I think like I think like what I'm learning from your example right now is like if you get to trigger something that is beneath the individual, you can persuade on a much more
So
manner.
you're 100% right about archetypal metaphors.
Yeah,
Now, what if I were to tell you, and by the way, I learned this from Lou Carbone, and if folks, one of the things I do is I write book reviews of books that are meaningful to me.
yeah,
So on the Journey Spark website, www.journeysparkconsulting.com, if you go to the What We Think section, there are book reviews. Now, two of them that talk about what we're talking about right now, that I'll start with, are Lou Carbone's book called Clued In, which is about like how to search for clues and make meaning out of clues around customer and employee experience. And he talks about deep metaphor as part of his book. And I've collaborated with him to do research about brand and customer experience applying. So his thinking's influenced me a lot. Right? And there's some things we're collaborating on now, which I'm happy to tell you about. Including writing an article, launching an organization called the Collaboratory,
yeah.
um, and Jerry Zaltman was Lou's mentor. Jerry is at Harvard, and he helped launch the Laboratory of the Consumer Mind to do research into neuroscience and consumer behavior. So Jerry wrote a great book that I did a review of called What Customers Think. It's all about deep metaphor. So Jerry and Lou and others have done a lot of research around unconscious thought and the way our minds actually work. And remember, I'm a student of why we behave the way we do. That's what's driving a lot of my thinking and a lot of my career path going into the marketing and consulting and ultimately customer experience and culture is a broadening from human behavior around, as individuals to customers and shoppers to organizational behavior and culture. And the intersection of customer experience and culture is actually about how employee behavior affects customer experience. That's the intersection. Because the peaks in the journey are actually the way your employees show up. That's the employees show up in a way that creates a better customer experience. That's the culture connection. Is why culture is so important to customer experience, as well as then it makes it more meaningful for the employees and gives them energy. It's a renewable resource. So what if I were to tell you, and I didn't come up with this, Jerry Zaltman and Lou did, there's about 20 universal metaphors that the way the human brain works is that everything can be mapped to, at the highest level, around 20 archetypes, 20 metaphors. The one that's so pervasive in insurance is the resource metaphor. They want to be a resource to you. Now, there can be a different type of resource. It could be a rock, a neighbor, hands. You're in someone's hands. I worked with a client where the right metaphor was a coach. They want to be your coach. So getting specific and intentional about that metaphor is not as obvious as just saying it's a resource, because you'd be a different type of resource.
Yeah.
But there's around 20 of these metaphors, and any really powerful brand is either like one, probably no more than 3 metaphors in combination. Nike is a connector. Coca-Cola is a connector. They connect people to each other. They want to connect, help people foster connections and happiness through connection.
I love how when I studied psychology, one of the reasons why I disembarked from the traditional system and didn't stay there and become a psychologist in the practice was because I had this thesis that the best psychologists actually are not psychologists in the world. I had this idea that there's like some people who are actually in the field who are proving some of their theses under the highest pressure that they know most about human nature. And I think this example is something that proves like the idea that I had back then right, because like I on my examination of who we are, I also came across the idea that we are like that what these ancient psychologists discovered, Freud and Jung, is that we are more like a house. It's like you call them metaphors, but Freud had this idea that the psyche is a house, and there's like different spirits in it, and that some of them make us healthy and others of them make us sick. And he was almost like this the CEO of the psyche would come in from outside and would rearrange the culture and to decrease the time of this one soul and decrease. And Jung had this idea that there was something beneath that, which was the collective unconscious, which is like this idea that humanity has agentic fossils of our ancestors that we can access through emotional pathways, through dreams, through visions, which we are born with. And that's why they had a big fight in a way. And I think like what you're just describing is the idea is that certain marketing campaigns for companies, for instance, it's not just that they persuade, but they activate certain agentic parts of that person that acts through them in a way. It's just, am I making sense, or am I
100. I totally.
I had in a cloud?
Yeah, no, you're right, and I think what we're both talking about here is that emotion is so important to understand.
Yeah.
And because one is, if we say that what we really value, what is value?
Yeah.
Values. Now you could say in economics, in broader society, in politics, it sounds tautological. Value is that which we value. Right? Well, why is something valuable? Because you ascribe value to it. Well, that's circular. Why do you ascribe value to it? Because it's meaningful to you? Why is it meaningful to you? Because I believe this is important. Why do you believe it's important? Ultimately, it's an exercise in faith.
Yeah.
Going back to 0 and 1 in philosophy, like how do you go from 0 to 1? How do you go from no belief to belief? You have to want to believe.
Yeah.
It's an exercise. It's the desire. Now, I think early on in our lives, there's something that happens largely, I think, because of I personally don't believe this is like innate in a human being that we have one particular value. Someone once exposed me to this idea of the 4 drive theory. It was a neuroscientist that I collaborated with that a colleague at a client introduced me to. And we 3 of us wrote an article together called The Social Life of Brands, which was a fun name. And it was all about how mobile and social change marketing. I wrote this years ago, and it was a cover article on the Strategy Business magazine, like a feature. And it was a lot of fun to write and collaborate with a neuroscientist and a client at the Maritz Institute. Maritz was a company that does loyalty and motivation programs and research. So I worked on their strategy, and we collaborated on like what's the future of loyalty and motivation, what should their services be, their technology, like how do they deliver, and what capabilities they need, et cetera. And I got to know the head of the Maritz Institute, which is like their think tank. And then we decided to write an article together, right, called The Social Life of Brands. And we organized it around something called the 4 drive theory, which was a Harvard professor came up with. And this Michigan professor really loved this 4 drive theory, which is basically the following. I'm going to connect this back to economics in a moment. And so, that they're 4 equally powerful human drives. We're born with these. There's lots of research done that none of these is actually more important than the other. The 4 drives are the drive to acquire, defend, bond, and learn. None of these drives is more powerful than the others inherently. They're always in tension and balance. So the drive to acquire and defend are basically fight and flight. They're very primal, but a lot of economics focuses on the drive to acquire. You want to acquire wealth, power, status, prestige, relationships. What are you accumulating and collecting? Now, you can't actually feel fulfilled as a human being if you only focus on the drive to acquire, because you're ignoring the other 3 drives. You will feel in tension with yourself and empty if you only focus on the drive to acquire in your life. Drive to defend, Michelin tires, safety, Volvo, safety. they're tapping into the drive to defend. It's incredibly primal and basic. Defend your kids, defend your honor, defend your community, defend your country.
Yeah.
That gives a strong emotional connection to defend.
Yeah.
Now, drive to bond. A lot of research has gone into human beings being social animals, and you could say it's from a biological determinism and Darwinism, like it's useful to be social animals, that certain things have evolved in our kind of innate habits because it's useful for survival to collaborate. Now, it also creates meaning to collaborate. It actually creates value. It's valuable from an emotional standpoint. If you say what's valuable is that which makes us feel better, right? It creates meaning in our lives. Those emotionally strong memories, it creates strong memories, therefore we value them. Value is a verb, not just a noun. Love is a verb, not just a noun, right? So you want it to be active. What gives it energy? Well, often societal connections and community are things we value. The act of sharing is its own reward because you value bonding. And this is something that as a 3-month-old, people exhibit this behavior. It's inherently equal to drives to acquire and defend.
Yeah.
Now, the drive to learn is also innate, but we tend to crush it out of people in society. Our natural love of learning, like the iPhone or the iPad, and you see like a 6-month-old can engage with a tablet. Like it's innate to learn. Kids love to learn.
What I find I love that you call those drives. I have this month is going to be special to you. First, because I'm talking to you, actually, which means a lot because a couple of months ago, like this idea with the podcast of talking to luminaries in the leadership sector was just an idea, but also because I'm traveling around the world and collect master classes from special people in this field. And the first one I collected in Sweden in 2.5 weeks ago, and I'm sharing a bit why this is interesting for now. It was a former client of mine we had like 5 years ago where I did some counseling for her when I was inventing psychotherapy tools. And while I was working with her, she was this contemporary dancer, an artist. And while working with her, we kind of like developed this, was mostly her, this model of seeing the psyche as a house, pretty much, where her emotional entities, she gave them names and she wrote them down, for instance, and we created this model where she would negotiate with these parts and where she would learn to activate and deactivate certain things. And she described her experience as a human being more like where sometimes certain parts of me possess me. And what I found so interesting about this idea is that almost this idea that we are a multi-layered walking language model with an agentic core, and where it's important for us to get to know these parts and to also know when something is off. For instance, like maybe I am not currently Lord in my own house, and that entity has its own drives, its own values, and its own perspective of things. Like I love that you mentioned mythology, for instance. That's very close to how the Greeks saw the psyche. It's like you were possessed by wrath or by lust, and it would take part of you and make you do things. And I think one of the most dangerous things we have in the world is that we have these parts that can take over, and it's not always visible to us. And it makes us perceive things as neutral, pleasureful, hateful, whatever. And it's like what's happening in the world, for instance, we have an instinct to worship leaders, for instance. And it's like there is sometimes like if we see a charismatic leader, we follow that person into the abyss.
Without reflecting enough about whether that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. But that's like why I love what you're sharing. It's like if you have if you occupy and mask the gap between agentic possession and the stimulus, then you're in control and you're not following a false promise.
So if you allow me,
Please, yes.
I've introduced a few different concepts at once. So before I launch into a different one, I'd like to close the loop on two of them that I introduced without finishing the thought. So in the the social life of brands, and I'm going to bring this back to Collage in a minute, and my mom, the artwork. So in the social life of brands, I learned about the 4-dive theory. I didn't invent that, but I understood the power of this framework and how it could apply. And what we wrote about in that article is how mobile and social change marketing, because they allow us to market to the whole person.
Yeah.
Because in the past, we would actually tend to focus in a lot of advertising on either the drive to acquire or defend. In our advertising is a bit like conquest marketing. You're trying to tap into someone's feeling and get them to feel like about a brand in a certain metaphor and a certain association and good insights would allow you to tap into one of these deeper metaphors and come up with the campaign of Michelin tires or Volvo safety, or you're in good hands with Allstate, but they're basically tapping to the drive to defend. Okay. Or the drive to acquire, like Avion and water and lifestyle, or Gucci, or that's a drive to acquire status. Okay. So you want to feel good about yourself, right? Nothing wrong with that from a marketing standpoint, as long as people feel you get enjoyment and get to feel better, that you could argue that's a good thing. I'm not making a moral judgment on that. And that's a whole nother conversation about whether it's, quote, manipulating people or whether you're actually giving them meaning in their lives. Like, what does a brand do? But what happens to drive to bond and learn? Now, a lot of those would happen, with physical experiences. They were really hard to deliver through advertising or through marketing mass communications, but word of mouth, in-person experiences, human-to-human interaction would deliver the drives to bond to learn. And certain businesses could tap into them more through their operations and their experience delivery than their marketing. Now, what's happening now with mobile and social, I'll give you an example. Like really powerful brands that tapped into this early on, like Apple and Nike, and later Under Armour and Lululemon, is like they've really tapped into the ability to go beyond the product experience and tap much more closely into how people feel about themselves and others in the drives to bond and learn. So now I've created a concept. So I like to think of mobile as the glue between physical and digital experiences, and social as a way to amplify and make visible experiences. So in the past, it was through word of mouth and human-to-human interaction, but now you actually can use social to amplify stories and meaning and build community. And so mobile and social have made it possible to tap into the drives to bond and learn, not just the drives to acquire and defend in marketing at scale. That's huge change. So I've created a concept called an experience collage, Daniel. This is something I write about in my book and I talk about sometimes on my podcast. And I link it back to my mom's artwork, which is, and that's why I use my mom's artwork in my branding. Because it's meaningful to me, and I think it's a good metaphor. So what's an experience collage? I think of it as an experience collage canvas. You're filling the whole canvas. Now, forgive me for using a 2x2 coming up as a consultant in my career. Consultants use lots of frameworks. The bottom left of the 2x2 is usage. Yeah. This is an experience as an individual for yourself, focused on the product's functionality or the service's functional benefits. There's less emotional content when you focus on the rational functional benefits. So that bottom left quadrant is a good experience. You can have a good experience that delivers on your expectations for functional benefits, but it actually won't create a really emotionally engaging brand if all you focus on is the rational functional benefits of a product or service. Now, what if I shift to the right, the bottom right of the 2x2, from the bottom left to the bottom right, and I go from product usage to meaning? So this is an experience that goes above and beyond the product itself and creates meaning for you as an individual. So, in a beyond the pill experience in pharmaceuticals, digital content, like when Nike or Under Armour focus on digital quantified self, they're creating meaning in the experience beyond the product usage itself. So there are experiences that go beyond the physical product. Now you're creating a digital experience that creates deeper meaning. Now, the top left of the 2x2 goes from individual experience around the product to a shared experience around the product. So the name in this quadrant is sharing. Bottom left is usage, bottom right is meaning, top left is sharing. Okay, that's good. Now, a shared experience is the drive to bond, and it reinforces taps into the drives to bond and learn. It's natural. Humans value it. There's emotional content there. You feel good about it, good about yourself, good about the brand. What happens if you have meaning and sharing? This is called community. So the top right box is community. So you have 4 quadrants of a 2x2: usage, meaning, sharing, community. Good, better, best. Good is usage, better is meaning and sharing, best is community. Highest emotional content taps into the drives. Actually, probably taps into all 4 drives. And if you actually want all 4 of these. You don't want to pick one. If you're doing customer experience strategy, you actually want to fill the whole canvas. Just like in artwork, you don't paint in one part of a canvas, you fill the whole canvas. So you want to, and actually your experiences you have are layers. You're putting down pieces, you're getting more and more pieces over time. And your experience collage canvas is a way to understand the totality of how all your experiences fit together to create more emotional resonance for you.
This was one of the most insightful things I ever heard on a podcast, to be honest, because originally I started with saying that we have a lot of divisiveness in the world. And it's like there's like cultural wars going on. And it's like what you just experienced, like described to me, was that this idea of a collage where you have a bond that almost is like a community in a way, which gives you all of your core psychological needs. So it's like
Well, and in society, we are all creating pieces and sharing the pieces in the collage with each other. You cannot experience it as an individual only. No man is an island unto himself, right? From poetry.
Carl Rogers explained listening better than anybody I ever met. He was like this. I think he's the greatest therapist who ever lived. Even though I interviewed, I think the second best. Shout out to you, Jeffrey. And he had this idea that there's fundamental rules to listening. Like you're not allowed to speak until the other person is finished. You have to accompany them like through with your whole body while they're speaking, and you're not allowed to speak until you. He used the metaphor like he's giving you a painting, and you have to first prove that you got a painting right of what he was giving you from an experience base, and then you give it back. And only when they say that's fine, you're allowed to share your own painting or question or something like this. And I think what's happening in the world right now, it's like we underestimate that these values that possess us, that when we diminish their paintings, for instance, for their beliefs, it is almost impossible to sit down at the same table and negotiate. It's like if I'm shitting all over your painting, you will not like me. And it's like what I'm missing in this divisive structure in the world is actual diversity of opinions and beliefs within communities in a way. Because it's like, for instance, this diversity movement, they were all thinking the same thing. They didn't have like external people who had fundamentally different belief systems. And I think like could be one of the remedies of what you started earlier, like leadership that listens again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that one of the core values of people who value liberal arts is this idea of making something better together, that you're not studying because you are better than others. You want to benefit from other people's learning and wisdom, and you want to engage in debate and dialogue to create a synthesis that is better than what was before. You're always adding to knowledge. And that's part of as long as we're engaging in politics or science or business in a way that we're making it better than it was before, so we're giving, not taking.
Yeah.
then we will actually get more meaning out of it ourselves and enjoyment out of it.
And it's also I love that you put art on your book. That was one of the things when I found so fascinating is I love that we even like you shared like over the top, like that started with vulnerability, but like what people believe is a very intimate thing actually if you think about it. And if we create a culture where it's no longer possible to be wrong, to present our paintings and help each other like beautify them together, I think that's exactly what's gonna foster like radical movements in the dark. Because you're like you don't trust the other people anymore. And maybe that's a good segue moving forward. Your mother was an artist. Your father, almost like like this, had more of a business mind. What were biggest lessons you learned from each of them that helped you to have a foot in both worlds, pretty much, like the chaos and the order, so to say?
So I learned a lot of things from both of them, and I've had lots of conversations over the years with both of them that I treasure. And I talk to my mom almost every day. I walk in the morning and will call her while I walk in the Greenway here in North Carolina, which is like, trails. And you see people walking their dog or their baby stroller or running or walking. And I walk and have my AirPods in and talk to my mom for like an hour every morning because, I used to live close by, but now we're with each other by talking every day, which is meaningful. Um, and so how did my dad influence me? So my dad was an idea guy. I value ideas clearly. I guess maybe I'm potentially, one of my partners once jokingly called me Dr. Egol. I don't have a PhD, but he's like, you love ideas, so I'm calling you Dr. Egol, right? I was like, well, is that a good thing? He's like, well, as long as you're practical about it, it's a good thing. But if you were esoteric and too theoretical, it would be a bad thing. So I have to watch myself. And a lot of what I'm focusing on with culture is actually doing versus knowing. There's a great book I'm reading, which I recommend, called The Knowing Doing Gap. It's by a couple of Stanford professors. But I'm going to do a book review of this, The Knowing Doing Gap. But it's all about the difference between knowing and doing. And like a lot of the reasons why change efforts fail is you think once you know something, it's the same as acting on it, when actually the acting on it requires not only belief and commitment, but habits. Right. So what culture is about driving habits and follow through. And I'm fascinated by how do you translate from idea to action, from insight to action. That's my whole focus of my career, is how you get to action. So if I ever become too theoretical and not focus on action, then I have to catch myself and say, wait, what really matters is the action, not the idea. So my dad was an idea guy. How did that manifest itself? He he loved to write. He loved to come up with ideas. He wanted to be an author when he was a kid. And his mom said to him, no, Morty, his name was Morton. He grew up in the Bronx, playing stickball and basketball. And she said, you need to either be an accountant, a doctor, or a lawyer. He became an accountant. Now, how do you, within Arthur Andersen, he actually created something called the new information model, which is a system dynamic approach, like to innovate the accounting model for managerial accounting so that you could model the business and it would create more meaning and insight than just the traditional accounting model. And he actually went to a partner in the Houston office and said, hey, Enron's your client. We should do this with them. And he's like, well, let's ask him. And they're like, we don't need this. Well, if they had used this, it never would have happened, right? If they had actually used the new information model, they never would have had, because it would have exposed all the issues, right? But it was basically prototyping a model of like applying, and he would engage with like Jay Forrester and Peter Senge and other thought leaders in system thinking about the innovation of this product to try to change the accounting model. And he was working on that, which is more consulting than than accounting. One of his early clients, he ended up leading the government practice and like coming up with new accounting for government, which just sounds like an oxymoron, right? But New York State was one of his clients, and Accenture, Anderson Consulting, was actually born at his client because they started using technology and information systems to implement the ability to change accounting. And that led to lots of consulting projects. So a lot of the founders of Accenture, like I saw at my bar mitzvah or people like that, that he was talking about creating new consulting business. But he ended up doing more business consulting later. And then he got very involved in education because he felt like there needed to be accounting for education and new methods of learning. So I got exposed to system thinking, to quality management. As he took me to a conference with Deming. As a high school student, I went to a Deming conference as an attendee with my dad. He also took me to like the US Open golf tournament or the US Open tennis tournament, or, we had lots of fun, more traditional fun dad son stuff. But like that was a very formative experience, going and meeting, W. Edwards Deming and going to a conference of educators, going to a quality management conference that my dad was at. And he created a school. The very last thing that had the Arthur Andersen name on it was actually the School of the Future. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about the last place that had their name on it before they went under was actually this school that he had launched. So he's very into like education reform and accounting reform and systems thinking. So I got exposed to a lot of people, which I think inspired in me a love of ideas.
I would love to hear more about that. It's like how we met, Matthew and Daniel, is trying to do three things right now. It's like connect world leaders from diverse industries to spark ideas, is to collect their stories, their tactics, and conserve it for the future generations in a way. But the second thing is particularly designed because I believe that like we need some new relationship to education, and that executive education usually happens randomly. And as like great executives are either created accidentally or they come from where the parents already like occupy like a high position of power. But I feel it's almost antagonistic to what the public education system is like. How do you feel? Why did you become a great executive? What do you think? What did your
I mean, some of it is just some of it is luck. My wrestling coach used to say, "Luck is when perspiration meets inspiration."
Oh, yeah.
Right. So, like, you need to work hard, but you need to be lucky or need to be in the right environment and take advantage of it. Right. But there are always experiences in your life. So, I'm going to mention another book that really I loved called Chasing the Bright Side by Jess Ekstrom, who's a phenomenal inspirational speaker. I was a speaker at an event where Jess was a speaker, and I got to see her give the keynote, and then I had to give a speech later in the day. And I got her book and read it, and she's a phenomenal woman. In her book, she talks about how she was an intern at Disney, and she was like doing photography as an intern there. Like, one takes the pictures with the photo pass. They have students who come in and they go through like a rotational program. And she got exposed by chance to a photo shoot for Make-A-Wish, where Make-A-Wish and Disney have a partnership to bring kids through Disney World. And that was impactful for her. And then she wanted to get an internship at Make-A-Wish after Disney. So it's like you're stumbling along your journey and you take advantage of opportunities. Now, the reason I brought her up is she talks in her book. Oh, and to finish this piece of the story, when she was at Make-A-Wish, she got exposed to like a child who couldn't make her wish to go to Disney World because she was too ill to travel. Yeah. So Jess visited her and dressed up as Snow White and gave her an experience so she could bring Disney World to her, and how it was me. And then she ended up noticing that she was lost her hair because a cancer victim as a kid, which is so tragic. She saw that she had a headband that she had created that she wore as like a, it's both meaningful and defiant at the same time. Like, I'm going to wear something beautiful as a headband and celebrate almost the fact I have no hair and show off my headband. Like, why would you wear a headband if you have no hair? And so she launched an organization called Headbands for Hope, which makes headbands. And her goal is to give headbands to kids with cancer. And at this point, she's given away millions. Every one you buy, you get another one given away. It's like a gifting model, a social good model. And she's given away millions and millions of headbands now from her Headbands of Hope e-commerce business. And she's a motivational speaker talking about her own experience and writing her book notes. So Chasing the Bright Side is all about optimism. And there's one core idea in the book among many. This book is definitely worth reading. It's one of the ones I did a review on my website because it's meaningful to me, which is why I want to share it. She says, imagine you have two voices on your shoulder, optimism and pessimism. The bright side is optimism. You want to chase the bright side. You have moments in your life that happen, and you can either listen to the voice and say, not now, not me, no way. Or you can listen to the voice that says, why not? Why not now? Why not me? And be optimistic. And a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people who drive impact, who we think of as amazing people, are ones who listen to the voice that says yes. And they do things despite overcoming obstacles and belief that they couldn't do it. They listen to the voice that says they can do it. And if you don't give permission to that voice, you never do amazing things. So you got to be an optimist. And I think this is a really profound thing. So I feel lucky that there have been moments in my life where I've said yes, and I feel better for it. I'm sure there are decisions I made that are bad. But I think there were some turns in my journey where I happened to say yes, and that the choices I made shape who I am, like anybody. And I'd be happy to share what some of those moments were. But I think ultimately it's because I want to have an impact, and I tend to focus on things that I feel like help me have more impact.
There's such a beautiful story. Talked about education, talked about how she discovered through this story the importance of optimism, and that we always have two modes of being at our disposal. One, and it speaks too much to me because in a couple of weeks with my uncle, I'm going to Auschwitz and to make a movie about Viktor Frankl. He wrote a book called "Say Yes to Life in Spite of Everything," and I think like one of the follow-up questions that I have in regards to this concept is, I believe, or rather, belief has me that says that beyond certain educational formats is either optimism for life or pessimism. And I feel that at the universities where I was, in a way, it was a lot of pessimistic literature or pessimistic spirit, where people were indoctrinated in such a manner where they were not for humanity and not for the world anymore. And it's like one of the things, what I loved earlier, what you said, is that the dangers of being intellectual is too far away from behavior, in a way. And that the great irony is that the great leaders usually are really busy. So it's like sometimes they are the best man, not necessarily the most articulated guys sometimes, because they're actually in the trenches doing some good stuff in a way. And I wanted to ask your honest assessment of where we are, and if you feel that the teachers that the current generation has is corrupted by pessimistic schools of thought. That was a long as horrible question, but I hope that you got the gist of it in a way.
Well, what we were talking about is how I think our educational system writ large crushes the drives to bond and learn out of people.
You told me in your childhood you were questioning things and you got punished for it. It's like, for instance, it's one of the things that I learned from Friedrich Nietzsche is that a good friend is a good critic, in a way. And it's like he saw himself almost like a hammer, like punching on ideas.
Well,
So there's nothing but the truth left.
you know the movie A History of the World Part Two with Mel Brooks?
Oh, dude, I love that movie. It's one of my
Okay.
favorite movies of all time.
So the opening scene with the first art critic, they have the first artist who's like so excited about painting on the wall, and then the first art critic gets up on a rock and pisses on the painting. That's negativity right there.
Yeah, and it's also it's when we just describe the two modes of being, like optimism and pessimism. It's sometimes when you can't create art, you don't take the noble way of applauding others who can, but you piss on their paintings. And we talked a lot about paintings, and you attack the artists, and then and if they come to
Yeah.
power, we end up with a culture that is deprived of art. You know.
So I think that as a society, I'm a hopeful person. I'm an optimistic person by nature versus I want to always chase the bright side. I always want to be optimistic. So that's my nature, to want to pursue things and do new things and innovate and collaborate, because I want to be hopeful and have ideas and collaborate with others to believe that we can have an impact together. So that's like a value system, a belief system, a bias that it makes me do things I do, and tend to see the glass half full versus half empty in my nature. Now, I think as a society, we have a lot. I always like to take the long view. I think we have a lot of opportunity. I think as a society, whether it's the US or more broadly around the world, I think the long-term trend is towards more freedom. The long-term trend is towards more um, uh, bringing people together versus apart. We have more bringing cultural understanding and exposure to, like, when I was, if I even just compared like now versus when I was a little kid, I think the understanding of the Western world is not actually the center of the world. And the whole, like the fact that the Caspian Sea was actually the center of the earth for so many hundreds of years. And that like we learn about Roman history and Greek history and about very Western Eurocentric view of history. But now our kids learn much more world history and exposure to diversity in the full world. That's progress, right? I think there is a progress over time, and people are learning to be more accepting of others. Our values evolve. Gay marriage was not accepted when I was a kid. Now, no, it's very broadly accepted. There still aren't everyone who accepts it, but it's more normal than not to accept that and love and care for other people. Whereas that was not as, like, for example, the story of Freddie Mercury and Queen and Bohemian Rhapsody. It's such a tragic story that he couldn't live as a true self, right? But that movie could not have been made 50 years ago, right? So there's progress, and I think, but there's a lot of ups and downs, like, and there are challenges along the way. But I think we actually are making progress, and I think it's important that we have conversations and we ask questions and we be respectful with one another and we don't approach things. So I do have worries about like how polarized we can become and how we can have echo chambers, or people can't listen to each other. And we need to encourage the liberal arts values of conversation and co-creation versus like trying to vanquish or prove the other person wrong. But I'm optimistic that we will get there as a society. Winston Churchill, who you raised earlier, he has a lot of great quotes.
Yeah.
One of his, just like Yogi Berra, two of the great, and Mark Twain, great quotes from all of them. One of my favorite from Winston Churchill is, "America will always do the right thing after trying everything else."
Yeah, that's a good one.
So I believe we'll get it right. We might have a lot of mistakes along the way, though.
Yeah, I'm worried. The reason why I'm worried is have you watched the movie Watchmen? It's a great, there's this comedian guy who's he's pessimistic about the American dream, and he said like, why is America not working? And he said because the dream has come true. And one of the things that I fear is that there's something fundamentally wrong about the story of which America is built upon. And it's like Viktor Frankl said this beautiful thing once. He said, "I would propose as an intervention to the United States is instead of a Statue of Liberty, they had a statue of responsibility on the other side of the coast." And it's like, I think sometimes like you can lose the principle of the path if you can focus too much on what freedom can do to you, you know, because it should be freedom to pick up like your responsibility and not freedom to be deprived of it, which is so strange because one of the things that our ancestors are really good at is the idea of like somebody who lives entirely deprived, like free to of consequences, is a psychopath. It's like that's somebody who doesn't care about other people and he's only does things for the sake of pleasure and who's a slave of his whims. But that's not like the ideal state of a human being. And I think like sometimes I wonder maybe they need to iterate and like add something to the story to make sure that they progress forwards without losing the principles of the past in a way.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to pivot slightly and
Please, yes.
introduce a funny thing, which brings it back to some one of the things we were talking about earlier about emotion and reason.
Yeah.
That they're really part of a whole person, that you can't say you want one or the other. You need both. I actually loved as a kid Star Trek, Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, but I loved Star Trek, and I think it was an interesting dichotomy in Star Trek. There's so many great writers in the original Star Trek, and the themes that were covered and the themes they explored in those shows are pretty deep. If you could do like literary criticism of Star Trek episodes, the themes that were explored, but the whole notion of McCoy versus Spock versus Kirk. Spock is logic. McCoy is emotion. Kirk is blend, and he's constantly choosing which side, and if you don't look at it closely, you might say Kirk is very emotional, but often he'll make very logical decisions. He listens, and it's almost like they're in the different sides of the house of the brain. But like you've got Spock and McCoy are different competing factions, and Kirk has to like reconcile the two and do the right thing. And I almost like, is it cyclical, or like, am I more like, do I agree with Spock? Do I agree with McCoy? I actually think you need both to get the wisdom to recognize that a lot of times making decisions based on emotion is not just the human thing to do, as McCoy or Kirk would say, but sometimes we're doing it because it's the right thing to do, that as long as it doesn't harm others and it creates value, making decisions based on emotion is just the way we do things.
It's a beautiful description. Is the reason why I'm going to Sweden is Maria Luska taught me this beautiful idea of seeing your psyche as almost like a board of advisors, and where you have the leader, you console each part, but if you completely, they all have their reason for existence in a way. And for her emotional pattern stopped if like she would actually listen to them and say like, you're overworking as a dancer. And when she listened to those parts, she would, for instance, not indulge in alcohol anymore or something like this. And I think like it's the idea of like emotional consultation, but with a sense of meaning where you do what's best for you now, has been in the past and will be in the future. Is like this idea of treating yourself as a collective, as a leader of a culture, is what can lead to good decision making, I think.
So if you allow me, I'd like to tell a little bit of a story of how I got where I am.
Yeah, please.
Now, and connect it back to some experiences I went through professionally. I shared earlier more about like when I was 8 or high school or college or my experience in I'm going to make it more professional now, of like the post business school experience.
Yes.
Okay. So I started, and again, about chasing optimism and taking advantage of the luck you have and the great mentoring relationships. I started out in consulting after college in Arthur D. Little. which was one of the oldest consulting firms at the time. It's the mythology of the firm. I ended up at Booz and Company, which also claimed to be one of the oldest consultants, which was right, which was there first. But Arthur D. Little was a smaller consulting firm, that I chose to be in Boston, in part to be near some of my friends. I had an offer at McKinsey to join the metal practice in Pittsburgh. I was like, I don't want to do that. That does sounds boring. I don't want to be in the metal practice. I want to be in Boston in the financial services practice at Arthur D. Little. And I joined. And then within 6 months of me joining, they shuttered the financial services practice and they put me in their metals practice. I mean, what are the irony? Have I joined a firm that arguably was not as prestigious to not be in the metals practice and and then they shut the practice I joined and ended up in the metals practice. Now, good news is Arthur D. Little actually had the top ranked metals practice. But and I learned a lot from that, which the point I'm bringing this up is you actually learn from things that you don't expect to learn from. Why was this a useful experience? Well, you make lemonade out of lemons. Why was this a useful experience? Because it was an industry being massively disrupted. Okay. What is the steel industry and the media industry, which I ended up working in after my MBA at Booz? Well, they're both heavily disrupted industries. So in the steel industry, it was a shift from integrated furnaces and unionized labor to arc furnaces and less unionized labor. Industry going through lots of change, and the big companies were having to figure out how to adapt to the smaller companies. And so I learned a lot about change and doing strategy work in industries going through change. And so I learned a lot from that. And the metals practice then got combined with the chemicals practice. It became the resources practice. So I got to work with a lot of plastics and other things like that. But I learned from that experience about how to think about strategy in industries going through a lot of change. I also picked up a metaphor that someone once gave me, which is that when you roll metal flat, it remembers the coil, because metal gets shipped in coils because it takes up less space.
Yeah.
And then you have to roll it flat and cut it. And it actually has a memory of the coil. And so the metaphor is you have to keep rolling it flat, otherwise it will bend back. So someone said once, like with change, you have to roll it flat and keep rolling it flat and a lot of time before the change will stick. So that metaphor stuck with me. And then I went and got my MBA. I was actually sponsored by Arthur D. Little to get my MBA, and I did something which was a bit of a leap.
For people who don't know, I hate to interrupt, who's Arthur D. Little?
Arthur D. Little was a company, a consulting firm that is not as well known in the US because when the 2000 downturn happened, I went to business school 97, 98. When the downturn happened, it was a private firm that had a lot of debt that had previously been public and then went private again. And all the partners left rather than deal with the capital call to refinance the debt. And so it ended up going bankrupt and then got bought by a vulture firm. And now that brand, Arthur D. Little, only exists in Europe. Or if it exists in the US, it's because they came back because it was out of the country for a while. But I was there, and it was like one of the top consulting firms, maybe in the top 10, but not as well known as McKinsey or BCG or Bain or Booz.
That's what I'm asking.
It was like 150 partners globally.
Wow.
To put this in context, when I ended up as a partner at Booz and Company, there were 250 partners. So it was like only marginally bigger. It was like $1 billion business with 250 partners. It was only marginally bigger than Arthur D. Little, where I started out. And it was like going from the minor leagues to the major leagues. I was at Arthur D. Little. Then I had an opportunity to work at Booz as a summer intern. I made a choice. Should I go I really was interested in marketing. And I thought in business school, I might switch from consulting to marketing. And I thought maybe I'd get a job at P&G or, some company like that, and learn about marketing, because I really enjoyed, like, why do consumers do what they do?
Yeah.
And I wanted to shift from kind of B2B to B2C. It was doing very industrial metals and chemicals and plastics. I was like, this is industrial stuff. Arthur D. Little had a very industrial client base. So I joined Booz for the summer because I decided, you know what, maybe I'll do consulting work for marketing intensive industries because I like strategy, I like consulting, but I really want to work in marketing oriented stuff. And if I don't work inside another consulting firm, how would I know if I would switch firms? And I can always do recruiting for marketing after the summer. After, in my second year of business school, they had like, second year recruiting where you recruit in the fall if you don't want to go back to the place you spent the summer. Well, I went to Booz, which had the #1 media practice. And it was actually a group called the Marketing Intensive Group. And it was media and brands, like, consumer and retail and hotels. They split the practice during my summer. There's a lot of change. Now, at the time, the internet was pretty new. It was a puppy. Google was only a few years old.
Wow.
And I was, it's 1997, right? So I actually chose to be in the media practice because it was going through tons of, media, entertainment, data, information companies. Think of like TV, newspapers, magazines, music, video, film, sports, theme parks. They were all going through change. And I decided when the practice split, I decided to join them in the media practice in New York. Plus, there were more partners in the New York office in the media practice. So I get more mentorship if I was in the New York office. So I ended up at it with a front row seat with some great mentors in the media practice at the dawn of the internet.
So you went, wow. So at the dawn of the internet, you were in this hugely disruptive company and time, actually, in a way, which might be one of the most disruptive times we ever had in history, if you think about it in a way. And you had front row seats to
I was doing consulting work with executives about how the internet would change their business. Now, to put this in context, a newspaper lost half their profits in 2 years.
Oh, Jesus Christ. So companies were dying left and right, probably, right?
Because like the classifieds went away.
So it's like similar to what's happening with AI right now.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, what do you do about this internet thing? Now, that affected ad-supported businesses, content-based businesses, subscription businesses. So like I got to work on things like how did the DVD affect the movie theater, or how does the internet affect the magazine, and what should your strategy be? Now, what I learned from that experience, Daniel, I remember a conversation with the CEO of a magazine. It was Hearst Magazines. And we were talking. I felt lucky to be having a conversation with the CEO while I was like a couple of years after my MBA. But we started talking about the importance of culture for the change. He is a CEO. He said, people go into publishing because it's a calling. This is a conversation I've had with other CEOs, with book publishing, with music, education. I've done work with education clients. It's a calling. People go, they don't necessarily get paid the most compared to banking or, other industries. Now it's tech gets the highest salaries, but so it's like they don't necessarily get paid the most, but people do it because it's purposeful, it's meaningful. They have a calling to do it. How do you sustain that as a CEO when you're going through all this disruption to continue to be one of those best places to work? Well, it's your culture. So the CEO that opened my eyes from shifting from consumer behavior to cultural behavior. Is that you're basically trying to drive behaviors of your employees, because the behaviors of your employees are what shape the culture. And so I started being really fascinated with industries being disrupted, industries going through change. Now, the journey created some additional opportunities for me because I got a very lucky chance to work on a music and video project, which was staffed with 2 partners from the media practice and the consumer practice, because music and DVDs were consumer products. They were sold in a physical form with shrink wrap in retail stores. So the one of the partners in the consumer practice who later ran that practice and ended up running North America for booze became a mentor to me. He took me under his wing. I worked on this, named Les Muller. I worked on this project with Les and John Friedlingheisen, who later became the head of the media practice and a good friend of mine. And I worked with the two of them, and I got to work in consumer products and how digital was impacting the intersection of a physical product like CDs. A lot of people might not like CDs. No one listens to CDs anymore. But back then, that was a new thing. It was still relative, well, CDs were not new, but there were adoption cycles. And the question was, the whole migration to digital was a huge shift for music and video. And then what Les had me do was he had me start to work with consumer and retail clients on how to evolve marketing. So I got to work with like P&G, Lego, L'Oreal, Johnson & Johnson, General Mills, Walmart, others on how do they change their approach to marketing because of the internet. How do they organize? How do they evolve their cultures? How do they drive change management? And there were a few intersection points I got lucky to work on, Daniel. One was the shift from advertising to experiences. So a lot of the way brands are built now is through experience as opposed to buying ads. So I got early on to work with brands as publishers, brands as content creators, brands as creating community. So they put money into building experience versus buying ads. Second, related to this, I got to work on the growth of e-commerce early on with some of the very early adopters in e-commerce, and how do you organize and how do you evolve your culture to be successful at e-commerce and behave like a lean startup.
Yeah.
And then I also got involved in shopper marketing, which is how do you change the way you market to people. I saw that this would not just be an in-store marketing, but it would be shopper marketing would become digital. Shopper marketing is how brands collaborate with retailers to influence consumers as shoppers. So it was all about like, how do you e-commerce and shopper marketing and loyalty were ways you create experiences that are largely digital and content based to influence consumer behavior. And I approach this from an organization design and culture and change management lens, not just a strategy lens. That allowed me to have more impact with my clients. Instead of selling like a 2-month strategy project, I'd sell a 3-year transformation.
Oh, wow. That's it. So you stumbled almost by accident into acquiring or being educated in the most powerful skill. Is there anything more powerful than knowing how to set a culture? I don't think anything persuasion based that is. It's like that's how that people who run countries do it.
Peter Drucker is credited with saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I believe this. I gave the Yogi Berra quote jokingly that in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice there is. What this really means when culture eats strategy for breakfast is that you have to translate ideas into action. You have to translate values into behaviors. You have to translate like the mission, the vision, the purpose, the strategy into, which are largely belief driven, into behaviors, which are habits of people. And a lot of things fail in change management because you focus on people's mindsets, not their behaviors. What's the difference? A culture is actually 4 things. It's mindsets, skills, behaviors, and relationship networks. Now, I didn't create that. I learned that from John Katzenbach, who's a great author and mentor. He was the McKinsey's head of change. He was the head of their change management practice. He led their New York office. He left to form Katzenbach Partners. Booz and Company bought Katzenbach Partners. So John Katzenbach, a McKinsey alum, sold his firm after it grew to 7 partners. He sold it to Booz because it was a better cultural fit than his old firm, McKinsey. And he wanted to help his partners grow and realize wealth. And he felt like scale was important. So he actually decided to sell this firm back to Booz, because Booz was doing great work in culture and change management. And So I got to learn another great mentor from, learn from John and others in that practice that I collaborated with, like Reed Carpenter, who leads the Katzenbach Center, and other partners I worked with, like Nico Connor and Tracy Entel and John Rolander, who were partners in this practice. I became focused on how culture got applied in organizations going through change that were more marketing intensive, like media and retail and travel and hospitality and technology and financial services and healthcare. I helped launch a practice called Booz Digital. Booz Digital was all about combining human-centered design, strategy, agility, and culture. It was about hearts and analytics, emotion and reason. In Booz Digital, the innovation, and I saw this from studying others and soaking it up and interacting with people, that what we really need to do is, rather than do strategy projects which then lead to an implementation project, we needed to, if I was working on e-commerce and things like that, I was like, you know what, we need to innovate ourselves, just like we're coaching our clients. So we need to change the strategy process. So we, instead of coming up with a PowerPoint document, we rapidly prototype the businesses we were helping work on. So that meant we needed to bring forward, instead of sequential handoffs, where you do strategy and then design and then implementation of coding and development. So you go from like consultant to agency to development firm. We need to do them concurrently. And have more of an agile. So we started hiring people from startups, hiring people from agencies, training our consultants to relearn how to work so they could work applying design thinking and culture thinking as part of. So it's no longer strategy, it's just about change. And that was really meaningful to me, is to actually learn to be vulnerable and realize that, like, the creative people could be just as important. There's no pecking order. The strategist should not lead the team. They should collaborate with people with diverse skill sets to add more value for the client.
This is so interesting for me. It's the idea of how to differentiate good from a bad culture, in a way. It's also, to what degree is innovation? I think Germany, for instance, suffers right now from having a climate where people who think differently are punished. And it's like, there was something very interesting happening during the COVID crisis, which was people who were skeptical of the totalitarian interventions, which were quite massive. Like, you couldn't leave your house, you were not allowed to go to certain areas. If you don't give the vaccine, you were not allowed to leave the country. And it was like, two cultures building themselves: the good citizens, and the other one, they called them Querdenker. It's like different thinkers. And it was quite interesting for me to see, like, oh wow, like, and I'm like you, I'm like, I got like pathological resistance to authority. Anyway, I got always the guy who got kicked off from school and stuff. So I don't like people telling me what to do. And it was interesting to see emerging a climate that was so quick to demonize all the people who had a different opinion, in a way. And it was so interesting to me. It's like, that's not good. It's like, you don't want to have a culture where in a year from now, like, we've killed all the innovators, all the pioneers, all the people who are weird, in a way.
I tend to gravitate to either center right or center left, because I like synthesis and collaboration.
Yeah, but that's like the beauty of what.
And like, when I see people on the far right, my instinct is to become center left, right? Or if I see people on the far left, my instinct is to become center right, because I want to make sure we can collaborate. And so I end up to be fairly centrist in my politics, because I believe in bringing the most diversity of thought and collaboration to how we solve problems.
It's beautiful. It's like, I had this call or this meeting with Nicole. She's this great artist from Hamburg, and I always thought of myself recently as more conservative, just because, like, there's some certain policies, like, because I'm an entrepreneur, so I like as little government as possible messing with my business. But then she said, Daniel, I don't think you're a conservative. Like, you're always startup, zero to one kind of guy. Like you're, like you literally conservatives look differently. They go the safe path. Like you're in the trenches, sleeping in your office. Like that's the kind of guy. It's not a classic conservative. I was like, oh, really? Interesting. So I like this idea that it's like we are oscillating between our belief systems too, and it's also useful to remind ourselves that that you don't have to subscribe to a cult just because you have an opinion. I think that it would be really cool to do this. How do you see it? What was your welcome to being an executive moment in your life? Was that you just shared the story of like how almost by a twist of fate you you got put into this tradition of high disruption and you were really affecting a lot of people. And I think like what I'm interested by is learning how people think who affect a lot of people. And I think there's nothing more that affects more people than somebody who's involved in culture.
So, I think I had a number of leadership opportunities as a partner at Booz and later PwC, which evolved, that helped me think like a leader and continue to learn. We're always learning how to be better leaders. The first ones was, when I was working on but one of the genesis of like the Booz Digital idea, which was a collaboration of myself and my partner, Chris Vollmer, who later led the media practice after John Friedlingheisen jumped over to Bain. So I've had a number of times, by the way, in my career where people who were mentors to me left or that I worked with. So like John Friedlingheisen chose to leave to go to Bain before the Booz Allen Hamilton Booz and Company split. The company, before it was acquired by PwC, used to be combined government and commercial consulting. It created a lot of friction. There was a lot of, you could see where it was going, and then ultimately like split the company. My dad went through that with Arthur Andersen and Accenture in the split, when the company split up. So we could see it happening. And he left to go to Bain rather than stay, and I chose not to go with him. It was a tough decision. I actually talked to people over at Bain about whether to go over there. I was not yet a partner at Booz. I was literally it felt difficult. Like one of my best mentors and sponsor to partner is leaving. Now, he wasn't my only sponsor to partner, like Les, who I mentioned, who led the consumer practice, was still there. And there were other partners that I worked with in my collaboration network. So I had the confidence to stay. And Chris stayed, and still is a friend. And, so like we had to rebuild the media practice together. He stepped up to become the leader of the practice. Not immediately. There was some other partners that stepped in, but eventually Chris led the practice. And I chose to stay, right? I saw in some of the work I was doing and Chris was doing this opportunity to fuse design thinking and lean thinking, lean startup thinking, and I was doing some work, where we did the strategy and then an agency would get the implementation. It's like, well, if we infuse some of this thinking earlier on, we can do the whole journey. And then we decided to launch Booz Digital together. And we thought about like, do we hire people organically? Do we acquire companies? Like, how do we partner with someone? And we end up acqui-hiring, where we found an agency founded by the former CMO of Sports Authority, a retailer who was also a McKinsey alum. And we acquired all 12 people at his firm, and he became the head of Booz Digital. This guy, Jeff Schumacher. And so then I was working a lot with Jeff, and I became the chief strategy and innovation officer of Booz Digital. So that was a leadership role to think about product offerings, thought leadership. And I learned a lot for the couple of years I was at Booz Digital, which we grew very rapidly in the first couple of years. And then we were bought by PwC. And I chose, we created the Experience Center out of the Booz Digital team, plus some agencies that PwC had acquired. It was a few hundred people, about a third of them out of Booz Digital. out of the team we built from 0 to 100 people in like 2 years. So that I chose to become the head of basically the leader for digital transformation and retail consumer clients, and went back to that practice and had a role on the leadership team because I didn't agree with the vision of David Clark, who became a head of the Experience Center. He was the head of one of the agencies that was acquired. His vision was the Experience Center would be like the ninjas at the center of the company who were the digital experts, the guys in black turtlenecks, right? And they would come in and do the digital. Yeah, but I'm not lumping you into this crowd. These are the people who felt like they were the creative people and they should rule the roost, and they were the digital gurus. My vision, along with Chris's at Booz Digital, and Jeff shared this too, was that we should upskill and engage everyone. We were transforming Booz to become more digital, and not only changing the clients, but we wanted all staff to learn. So we wanted people to rotate through, do tours of duty through Booz Digital and go back to their practices rather than be viewed as the experts who were better than the people in the practice. Jeff didn't stay at Booz Digital when we were acquired by PwC. He actually, BCG Digital Ventures was founded by half the team at Booz Digital went over there when we were acquired. So that was another opportunity to leave, but I didn't go to BCG. I stayed.
Why?
Because I felt like I had a good collaboration network and when I was at Booz Digital, I was working with a lot of partners across industries, as well as in the consumer practice. So I stayed with an agreement that while I was leading digital and the consumer retail practice, I can continue to do half my work with other industries. So Booz Digital was very cross-industry. So I went back to the consumer retail practice to focus on digital work, but continued to collaborate with other practices. Later on, PwC reorganized and pivoted the model from like industry to functional. So there was a customer practice, which was better aligned to my cross-industry focus, so that some of the frictions went away of working cross-industry. But I stayed. And so I had this leadership opportunity in Booz Digital, digital transformation. And then I also had a leadership role on like thought leadership earlier in my career, publishing and ideas. And then more recently, I decided to leave. I finally decided to leave after, like, a lot of people left right during the PwC deal, like 20% of the partners left. And then after, like, there was a 4-year earnout, like a basically incentive comp to stay. I stayed 10 years after the PwC acquisition of Booz. Why? Because I enjoyed collaborating with others. I felt like the test for me to stay in consulting and stay in Booz or PwC is I always felt like I was learning and growing, and as long as that was happening, I would stay. And if I enjoyed collaborating with others, I would stay. I got to a point where I decided, I went to this training course called Make Your Mark. When you turn 50, I'm 53, they gave you this good idea from PwC to give you a course to re-energize you and think about your why, so that your last 10 years or so, you're still energized and adding value and not coasting. And I thought for 3 days about what is it really that motivates me. I said, I was vulnerable. I talked to others. I thought about what I would want to do, like post 60. There's mandatory retirement at 60 at PwC. Can't be an equity partner after 60. I thought about it. It's like, I really love mentoring others. I love teaching. I love publishing. I love having an impact. The work I enjoy doing most is actually coaching executives. I don't enjoy like doing the Salesforce.com or SAP implementation. I enjoy working on culture and change management and leadership coaching.
Yeah.
And helping the clients learn to work in new ways. So I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave and create my own firm. And I wrote a book, the CX and Culture Connection, which was a cathartic experience. I'd written over 25 articles, but never a book. And I wrote this book and I launched a podcast by the same name, launched my company. Some of the mentees I worked with over the years have actually or worked with me, come to work with me, which is really nice. To kind of get back together. Some people who had done other things and then came back to join me. And it was a very much an opportunity to have fun being an entrepreneur, but feel like I'm much more focused on the things that I care about most and much more coaching and leadership development and change and culture versus like big consulting programs with large teams that I feel like you're self-interested. You're just trying to sell bigger programs because that you can make more money.
Yeah. Peter Beale said earlier on, I think I don't know, with these internet clips, you never knew when they were recorded, but he said that the original idea of these consultancy firms was beautiful to go inside the company and restructure them, but they've corrupted to a degree where they put themselves first rather than the customer.
Well,
I think
also I felt like the culture at PwC was a problem.
Tell me about
It was not collaborative. I actually found it very hard. At Booz and Company was 250 partners. I knew every partner by name. I collaborated with a lot of them over the years. And we enjoyed teaming. The culture was all about teamwork. The incentive structure was 70% of your comp was based on global performance, 20% based on country performance, and 10% based on individual performance. Okay. PwC had they talked about how it was a balanced scorecard and how it was based on like teaming, but it was very much sharp elbows about your individual performance. Booz actually had a model called like allocated bookings, where up to 8 partners could share credit for a project. And we tried to get PwC to adopt it because we believed in it. They wouldn't. And it basically encouraged, infighting over sharing revenue. So if I would have an idea, like I had one project where I literally worked on the split of a company, and I had 8 partners on the project, including myself, because it was the right thing for the client. It's a big, big transformation effort to split the company in 2, with like 50 people working on it, with 8 partners, because we did, it's you want to basically bring other people if they have the right expertise, and we had an incentive to grow the pie, to do the right thing by the client. At PwC, just getting 2 or 3 partners to team was hard. You had to do it in spite of the incentives, not because of them.
So instead of incentivizing innovation and success, you were punished for it to some degree.
Yeah, and also like I felt like the Booz Digital was all about collaboration and working in a new way and helping the client evolve their culture to work in this way. And all of a sudden, the Experience Center was all about like us versus them internally and who gets to be the digital experts. And it sucked the fun out of it. I'm really enjoying collaborating with others, and focusing much more on upskilling and coaching, engaging client teams. I still have people involved, but the average team size is smaller and more senior, and it's much more focused on how to bring together strategy, culture, and change management and drive the work in the client in the right way.
If you would give a masterclass on how to create a success culture, what would be the first module be about? And it's mandatory for every, let's say, Fortune 500 CEO to watch.
Okay. Culture.
Get a percentage of the pie.
So culture is all about behavior, Daniel. I said that earlier, mindsets, skills, behaviors, relation. The most important is behavior. The way culture works is this. So you have like a lot of companies focus on mission, vision, purpose. Those are useful. And they're distinct things. And you can, and a strategy really is around asking specific questions that help you make your mission, vision, and purpose more sharp and distinct and meaningful. It's like the who, what, why questions that make your mission, vision, purpose more meaningful. and then also translating that into a set of capabilities that you're building. That, like, because this is a booze, later PwC philosophy, capability-driven strategy. Paul Lyman and Cesare Minardi came up with a book called The Capability-Driven Strategy. It's coherence. If you have a strategy that's coherent, you pick 3 to 6 capabilities that make you who you are. And you actually will pick markets to go after that leverage your capabilities. You don't define the capabilities to compete in your market. You pick the markets to compete in based on your capabilities. And over time, you will pick things you want to be. You make strategic choices through the lens of your capabilities. Now, why do I bring that up?
Wow.
You can do all of the work you want on mission, vision, strategy, purpose, values, and articulate them. If you don't translate that through to actionable behaviors that your employees can adopt as habits, ultimately, you want them to be habits of your employees, nothing will happen. All change efforts will fail. Culture will eat strategy for breakfast. You will have a failed blank transformation effort, whether it's strategic transformation, a new workforce strategy, a new technology implementation, whatever it is, will fail if you don't think about culture. Why? Because I'll make the example with learning. If you just focus on mindsets and getting people to buy into the need to change, shifting their mindset, you create space for change. It's like pushing the metal flat, but it'll come back. Okay, you get people to agree change is needed, but then actually it's like going to classroom training, and you get bought into the idea, but if you don't actually practice it immediately after the training, you lose it. It's just the nature of learning. If you don't practice things and turn them into habits, basically you have zero impact or very, very marginal impact for strategic priorities. So if you want to build capabilities, it's about behavior adoption. Now, I'm going to make this in this masterclass outline. And by the way, I do workshops and help clients identify the behaviors they want and then help design systems of change to drive behavior adoption.
I also want to plant the seed so I can persuade you to contribute a masterclass to the platform.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk more about how to do that.
When you were sharing that, it's so interesting because can I just share what I learned from you right now? There's a fundamental misunderstanding of why people do things for executives in the world. It's people who talk numbers, but actually, like if you think about from a culture perspective in a way, like if you are helping me, for instance, to foster an identity, when I'm engaging with people who feel compatible with me, I can alter their behavior and do a deal with them, for instance. And I was thinking do you know the podcast Hardcore History? Mm-hmm. It's the best podcast that ever existed.
Hardcore History.
Hardcore History, best podcast. Shout out to you. I hope to get the guy on my podcast right now. And he shared one time the story of fanaticism in the Second World War for the Japanese. And there's so many crazy stories of how they created a culture where their soldiers found an island still holding their post 30 years after the war was over or something like this. And they were so fanatically entangled with the culture of that leadership regime was that even if they showed them the newspapers, like the war is over 20 years, they would shoot the guy because they thought these were propaganda people in a way. So it's like, I think it was not coherent with their belief system, so they rejected it. It was impossible because they wear their belief systems. And things like the current culture luminaries have to do a better job at conveying how it is the idea of power from my point of view. It is influence. It's the study of influence. It's crazy how 100%. So basically, the way the theory of change that I believe is that you need to have some kind of impetus around like why something matters. That's important to shift people's mindsets and to get people to create space for change around like how their mindset shifts. That's important.
But that's like knowing, not doing. I mean, I talked earlier about the knowing doing gap, right? So that's knowing that change is needed. That's not doing the change. How do you translate it into doing? Well, the propagation mechanism, Daniel, is you go from mindsets to commitments to behaviors to habits. Okay. So there's a
Are you not missing the idea of identity? Because it's like when I'm in a negotiational setting, it's probably shouldn't say this out loud, but like I'm like one of the I teach persuasion in my school, and it's like oftentimes they have certain identities that if activated you can persuade them. For instance,
but that's what drives commitment.
right? It's like if you're a decision maker, or because I think like what I learned from you is that we have stories that drive us in a way, and it's like, but sometimes you need to activate them.
Yeah, well, so that could be the propagation from mindsets to commitments, is that you tell a story to yourself that I am the person who engages in these types of behaviors. Now, when you're building habits and you read, like, another book I reviewed recently was um, Culture by Design by David Friedman, and like, great book. Or Atomic Habits by James Clear, another book I reviewed recently. I had David on the podcast. I haven't had James Clear on the podcast yet. But the idea is we tell stories to ourselves that form our identities. And you want to tell yourself a positive story. It's a form of like mentalism, positive visualization. You want to tell a story of yourself having the right behaviors. Now, so that's part of going from a, like it's important to you. I've expanded my mindset. I'm now making commitment. I want to get better at this. I shift the story about myself. This is important to myself. You want to make commitments explicit, because people will act in a way that's like, they will think in a way that's consistent with the way they act. You know, the phrase act your way into a belief system. So if you actually consistently act a certain way, you'll start to believe it. It's like do, feel, think, as opposed to think, feel, do. And that's the way the human brain works. Do, feel, think is more effective than think, feel, do. It's more important to get people to make commitments and act repeatedly, and then they'll feel a certain way and think a certain way. So behavior leads to emotion, leads to outcome. And if you drive commitments and then get people to practice the habits, then what you do is you go from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, to conscious competence, to unconscious competence, right? That's habit. I didn't create those phrases, but and I forget who does, because they get so used now. But it's as a professor, I think, came up with that. But so basically, habit is unconscious competence. You do it 95% of thought is unconscious. Because you built it as a habit. You don't have to think about how to ride a bicycle. You don't have to think about how to catch a baseball. You do it, right? And in a wrestling match, I didn't have to think about the move I did because I practiced it so much. I just did it, right? If you think, it takes too long. I was a soccer goalie. You think about what the player is doing. You don't think about how to dive and make a save.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and one of the dangerous things also I just realized is from learning from you is that maybe having a culture is not optional. Maybe you need one, and maybe if somebody offers you to join their tribe, even if that's a bad tribe, if I'm if I'm an orphan, psychologically speaking, and that person offers me a home, I take it, even if it's a bad one. In a way, it's like that's what I also find interesting in the idea where the world is going in regards to everybody needs their culture, and that maybe like if we are becoming the architects of culture for ourselves, we can pick again and leave something behind that is disempowering and join someone else. Because that was, for instance, for me, very difficult. It's like I was struggled with addiction a little bit in the past, and all my friends we're having a culture that was revolved around hedonism. So it's like leaving that like was very painful for me, and it's I needed something better. And a part of why I started this podcast is like to find like a new culture I can assimilate into that maybe is better in a way. And that's like, what would you tell an individual on how to acquire the tools to become a leader for themselves in regards to establishing this culture. Because, for instance, for me, it's nobody really. I discovered the word leadership or executive or very late. I was having this first startup with my friend. He said he was doing this pitch deck and he wrote CEO under my name, and it was so strange to me because I was like, that title didn't even exist to me, and that was like the first time I acquired a new identity. I was like, what? CEOs are the big rich guys in these tall buildings. Like I can never, I can never be like this. I'm sorry, but it's like you have to take that role. How would you help somebody to discover positive identities for themselves? What would you say to somebody who's starting their leadership, maybe who's foreign to the concept? Like a leadership starter kit that you send per mail, something like this.
So leadership is about being able to understand yourself and your goals and motivations and how they connect to some higher purpose, and how you're going to help advance that higher purpose, whether it's in a company or in a society, right? So as a lead in a team of some sort, you're trying, however big that is, whether it's a team in a company, the whole company, or a whole society, as a leader, you're trying to impact positive change because it's meaningful to you and the others in the community that you want to be better off after your impact than before. And so you have to start with understanding if the purpose is not clear, again, the mission, vision, purpose, strategy, if it's not clear, one of the things you can do as a leader is build shared understanding and commitment to that. But if you don't know your why, like Simon Sinek says, start with why, it's very hard to have a sustained commitment and focus your behavior and your energy in the right direction if you don't know why you're doing something. So I would start with the purpose. There's this concept that I love called higher ground versus lower ground thinking. I wrote about it in an article about leadership experience. You made me think about this because I wrote about leadership experience with another partner of mine, Sujay Saha, and we wrote about how leadership, customer, and employee experience go together, and we need to elevate the understanding of leadership experience as distinct from customer and employee experience. So this was an article we wrote in Strategy and Business called Return on Experience Cubed, Leadership Experience. There's a longer title. But return on experience is if you want to get an investment and a return on your investment and experience, there's customer and employee experience are often viewed distinctly. And leadership experience is very high leverage to create value by improving both customer and employee experience. Now, what's leadership experience? Leadership experience, we use this concept of high ground and low ground thinking and neuroscience. Art Kleiner wrote about this in a book he wrote about that I really loved about leadership experience. Low ground thinking is actually in the brain. It's very expedient thinking. It's like System 1 thinking, System 2 with Danny Kahneman, where System 1, I may get them backwards, but I think System 1 is like higher ground, where it's basically you're thinking about more consciously, you're mentalizing, you're thinking about others, you're thinking about how you make them feel. So like mentalism is a practice, as a behavior that allows you to engage in higher ground thinking. Lower ground thinking is more expedient. It's often, viewed very pejoratively, like, oh, you're doing that for expedient reasons just because it's easy. Right now, a lot of decisions actually get made this way. And I said earlier, like 95% of decisions are unconscious. So it's not bad if decisions are made this way, if they're made in a way that is like not harming other people and actually makes everyone better off. But so if you focus on closing the deal or generating the sale or things like that, as long as you're not manipulating and doing things in an unethical way, and it's just fast and easy to do it, but it's not very reflective. You don't spend a lot of energy thinking about it. And higher ground thinking is spending more energy to actually elevate. So what a leader does is they invest time to develop their higher ground thinking and actually understand why they're making decisions, the impact it has on other people, and they really focus on how does my decision and my behavior affect the customer? How does it affect other employees? So really, Simon Sinek says leaders eat last. Like leaders, if they focus on higher ground thinking, it actually has more impact because it's more effective at getting the behaviors you want from other people.
I talked once with Andrew Huberman, and I asked him if it's possible for him to create a tool that measures meaning. And he said, he's a good idea, but like, we don't know how to do that yet, but it would be interesting. What I got from you right now is the importance of purpose, and that maybe, I want to feedback from you, maybe meaning is eternal management, where you're aligning your decision and what you need now, what your team needs, but also what the higher power needs and the world as a whole. And I heard a quote recently, for instance, from Mark Zuckerberg from back in the day that scared me. He said, "What's good for Facebook is not necessarily good for humanity." And I was like, do we need a leader at the top who is in alignment for what's best for the company or for himself? Or do we need that higher power, that purpose integrated into our strategy? Should we lead like for profit or as a profit, pretty much?
Well, if I go back to like if you apply the concepts of the experience collage I mentioned earlier to have like usage, meaning, sharing, and community, like it will inherently focus you on things that make the community better off. Like, and your customers will be better off. You can't succeed at the expense of your customers and expect, like, it's actually, there's lots of data that shows. I recently did some research where we looked using a panel data from a company called Bera.
Yeah.
This is for an article I'm in the process of writing for HBR. So with my friend Lou Carbone that I mentioned earlier. So we went and Bera, the head of strategy at Bera is a former partner of mine that I worked with at Booz, Ken Favreau. And Bera is a panel that has lots and lots of data on that you can use to benchmark your brand health, your brand positioning, your customer experience. They ask like hundreds of questions in this panel, which allow you to build really deep insights around the strength of your brand and how people perceive it. They get millions of people to fill it out, and then basically you can ask consumers about different brands and their feelings towards the brands. And I took that Bera panel of 1,500 companies and overlaid on it. We overlaid on it scores along 3 dimensions for a company. We built 3 lists. The list of companies that are best places to work. There are multiple published lists of best places to work. So who gets viewed as best place to work? We use the Glassdoor ranking just to keep it simple. With Glassdoor ranking of best places to work, and that gave us a certain number of companies, and some of them overlapped the Bera list in our sample because this is a sample. It's like 40 companies roughly in the Bera list were on the best places to work list. Then we found companies that were very, very highly scored very well in terms of Instagram followers, like social media or any social media followership. So we looked at who made this list of the most, where they had the highest consumer engagement and community around their brand. And then we had enough more. We looked at the overlap with the Bera population, the Bera sample. Then we looked for companies who were highly rated in the literature as having strong cultures. Like for example, the books in Firms of Endearment, the books in Good to Great, the books in Fifth Discipline. So we looked at companies that were admired, right? Or had books written about them, or maybe they were for example, Joseph Michelli wrote a book about Ritz-Carlton, so that Ritz-Carlton made our list, right? There were about 250 companies on that list from synthesizing from the most admired companies, and we looked at the overlap with Bera. What we found is about 10% of the companies, the 1,500 companies, made one of these 3 lists. And some of them less made all 3. Very few made all three. There was an upward sloping line. If you looked at their net promoter score of no list, one list, two lists, three lists, of how good the net promoter score was. Being on more lists was good, right? We looked at the Barra data and we looked at brand health, upward sloping line. There's a measure of customer loyalty, upward sloping line. So what does this tell you? You want to be good at both customer and employee experience. You want to have a strong culture, okay? That drives results. There have been other data that show, like Jim Stengel's written about how if you have purpose, it leads to growth, right? So I think there's a lot of evidence out there that like strong employer experience leads to growth, strong customer experience leads to growth, having both together leads to growth. Let me connect culture to customer experience in a very simple way for you, if you allow me. So I think it might make it really tangible if we talk about an example about how do you translate, identify the emotions, and then actually drive behaviors in a way that lead to the emotions and create great outcomes for the customer, the employee, and the company. So, with the retail client, we mapped out the customer journey, and this is a company. Think of it as their positioning is they provide a high level of touch, a high level of service. It's actually a retailer that started with a single store in New York, and now they have a $500 million e-commerce business because they provide very high touch service. It's not just a website, but they have people who can answer your questions on the phone if you call. Plus, they have people manning the chat, people answering the email, so you're not on your own. And sometimes people will, and you don't have to go to a physical store. You can call or email, so it's convenient. And they've grown very well because of a high focus on customer service, high customer experience focus. So I worked with the head of marketing who wanted to think about, we're already good at customer experience. How do we take it even to the next level, which is a great client to have. It's not just playing fix a problem, but thinking about increasing their relevance and taking it even further. What a wonderful opportunity. And they're already clearly very committed to this. So we looked at hundreds of customer calls. They could be 6 minutes or 40 minutes. Think of like photography, video, computers. A mix of professionals and consumers calling in. And the people who work there often have a background where they used to be photography buffs or video buffs or computer geeks, right? And they want to continue to work in their field, but they get constant training in the sales team. They get constant training in the latest stuff, product training. But the soft skills are often left to like informal mentorship. Okay, so what we did is we listened to hundreds of calls. We analyzed them. We interviewed people. We did some focus groups. We looked at some data. And we actually mapped out, there are two types of journeys, either a project or a problem. That's why people came to them. I'll stick to project for this discussion for a second. If they have a project journey, that a really good journey, they had to experience 4 emotions over the journey for the journey to go well. They have to feel relaxed, supported, confident, and optimistic. It's a bit like a crescendo. So to feel relaxed in the very first few minutes of the journey, if you don't make them feel like you're listening to them, that you hear them, you emotionally mirror them, that you're not there to hard sell them, like they shut down or get antagonistic, and they might get off the call. So if you don't make them and that's just true in a lot of industries. When people come in, if you don't make them feel relaxed, everything goes off the rails. Okay. It's not don't just say be empathetic. Say, well, what can you do to help them relax? Okay. But you could actually measure now with AI, actually the emotional content of an experience. If you looked at the transcripts and the audio, you can see this person's relaxed is the feeling we want. Then they feel supported, which is like And by the way, the metaphor here is you want them to feel like the salesperson is a coach. He's supportive. She's supportive. They are supportive. So supported basically means you show you're other-oriented versus self-oriented. You're not there to hard sell them. You don't just come in and hit them with your qualifications right away. You demonstrate that you're supporting them. Yes. Right? Then they need to feel confident that they're getting to the right answer. So their confidence is how they feel, which is not quite the same thing as supported. It's actually a nuance. Then you want them to feel optimistic that they can win and engage in the category in a way that's meaningful to them emotionally. Like, I feel really optimistic about my photography future, or I'm launching a podcast and I feel really optimistic about podcasting is going to work, right? Which makes them more likely to have a repeat relationship and buy more from you, right? And come back to you, because how they feel about themselves, not just how they feel about you. If you get all four of those emotions, wow, that's a home run experience. We actually quantified that the presence of these emotions was highly correlated to the right business outcomes. Close rates, repeat purchase rates, basket size, et cetera, loyalty. And we also looked at the right behaviors that make you feel that way. Now, this is an important point. We talked about culture being about behavior. There are two ways you can approach customer experience and employee experience and culture all together. Direct behaviors and indirect behaviors. Direct behavior is more relevant for the example I'm giving you here, but I'll talk about indirect too in a minute. Direct behaviors are how do your employees show up in the experience and behave in a way that creates those emotional peaks. I've done this in retail, hospitality, healthcare, financial services, B2B manufacturing, et cetera. You can map the journey, understand that the peaks in the journey are where there's an emotionally resonant experience against that whole experience collage. And you want the right employee behaviors that create those peaks. So if you have to prioritize the 10 or 20 behaviors you want for your culture, it should link to what gets you these emotions. Yeah. Okay. Now those are direct behaviors. What most culture efforts fail because they focus on values, not behaviors, which are important. They're principles, but you need to make it specific about the exact behaviors you want. And you need to focus on making commitments and practice of the behaviors. So that could be that you just have people go through a habit building cycle where every week you give them a check-in or a nudge, say, how's it going? You make a commitment, I'm going to practice this behavior. Once you share what the behaviors are, they make a commitment, hey, I need to practice this one. And you need a mechanism for people to get training and practice it. What matters is the practicing of it, not the commitment to it alone. Most training focuses on awareness of the need to behave, not the actual practice of the behavior. Or you practice it for 15 minutes in a role play and then that's it, and you never do it again. So you need some mechanism. It could be check-ins with people. It could be recognition and rewards. It could be rituals like at Ritz-Carlton. Every day the employees talk about one of the behaviors and they rotate through the Ritz-Carlton basics and then they repeat it. Every 25 days, they start the cycle over again, which forces self-reflection and mentalism. You can put it into performance reviews. You can encourage your leaders to tell stories. These are all ways to reinforce behavior that are more direct behavior. Now, indirect behaviors are also important. Indirect behaviors are how employees engage with each other to design, implement, operationalize your capabilities and your experiences. So an example, I call them cornerstone disciplines. Imagine like quality management, agile product management, Lean Six Sigma, design thinking. These are schools of thought that actually have habitual behaviors you want to practice. So you teach people a discipline like this is actually a great way to reinforce behaviors. And the indirect behaviors, I actually started approaching culture more from the indirect side. And then a light bulb went off that we can't forget the direct behaviors. Those are actually often the most important to deliver. So there are two windows into culture here. And ideally, you do both. You can either come at this from the standpoint of what's my strategy. I have a tool called the Value Accelerator, Daniel. You
What
can
is
see
the
the Value Accelerator. It's on the Journey Spark website. If you go to journeysparkconsulting.com and look for the Value Accelerator tab, there's some short videos there. You can see the information. But basically, any business creates value. Anything you do, I learned this in outcome-based selling, it's either better, faster, or cheaper. If you're going to create value for someone else, you're either delivering something that's better, faster, or cheaper, or some combination of the three. It's actually very hard to be the world best at all three at the same time. So strategy is about choice. So when you develop a strategy, and we talked about capabilities, you're building capabilities that align to, and you can dive into their ways to be better, ways to be faster, ways to be cheaper. And there's a taxonomy I have about like a tool of like how to pinpoint which is your approach.
Yeah.
And I have 3 modules.
Yeah.
The first module is strategy. The second is culture. And the third is the voice of the customer. In the strategy module, what you want to do is get alignment on your strategic choices for better, faster, cheaper. And you can basically get aligned about where are we focused? How are we trying to create value in the world? Better, faster, cheaper, in what way? The framing I have is a starting point because you can have a much richer discussion to make it meaningful for your own company. But it's the rubric actually helps you pinpoint, we're here today, but we need to be more over here. Like we're good at better, we need to get better at faster.
Yeah.
We need to pivot. The cultural diagnostic is the second of 3. Rather than do a general cultural diagnostic, a totally bespoke approach, I've taken my 25 years of experience in culture and created a customized culture assessment that actually can see how aligned is your culture to your choices for better, faster, cheaper.
Yeah.
So, and then the voice of the customer allows you to see whether you're delivering on your brand promise. Do your customers think that you're delivering on, like, what are you getting from them? Are you delivering better, delivering faster, delivering cheaper? And there's levels below this. There's like 20 questions that you can actually see, like, where are we today, as well as which emotions you're making them feel and what you're doing to make them feel that way with minding the open questions. I have a taxonomy of emotions with closed-ended questions and then open-ended questions to get at the metaphors and the emotion and the behaviors. Once you know this, you have all 3. It's a very rich diagnostic to say which metaphor, and you can complement this with interviews and management workshops, things like that. But there's 3 surveys basically with the leaders, all employees, and the customers, and you get a 360-degree view of how aligned are we as a team? Are we delivering an experience that's congruent with the strategy, or there are gaps to address? And how are we making people feel along the journey?
Yeah.
And what behaviors do we want to focus on in our culture, which tend to be either indirect or direct behaviors, to realize that strategy? And this is a starting off point that you can then add texture to it, but it dramatically accelerates. And what I've done with this toolkit is I've taken what previously used to be a $500,000 to $1 million project, and I can deliver it for $25,000 to $50,000.
So you're interesting. So you were just, wow, how are you doing that?
Because the tools are automated and simplified, and we can leverage a mix of surveys and AI.
That's
Now
what I
you
was
can
thinking about. What was one of
Yeah.
the things I wanted to talk to you after this call. It's like, if artificial intelligence could be a great tool to the preservation of culture, that's what I realized. It's like I had an AI agency a year before, and one of the things that was really fascinated by was the interviewing David Weidekerson, he's one of the world-leading experts for transitioning of wealth. But one of the things that I thought was difficult was how do we transition a culture when a leader is leaving the company? It's because oftentimes if it's founders led, it's the spark is going into the ether and the company is dying. And
Well, no, the culture is supported by everyone in the company, and I think of it as building a cultural movement. There's always people who are influencing. You're right that some of the leaders have an outsized impact on the culture. But just like a social influence network has people that are highly influential, if you look within a company, there are other people. You can map the social network. There are people that have a huge disproportionate impact that other people draw energy from them.
Wow, that
Okay.
would be cool to see the different kind of people inside the company.
You can do this, and it's something that you can certainly get into if you want to use tools with data to map the network. You don't have to go to all that rigor, but it can be useful step in some circumstances to map the network out. The basic principle of building a cultural movement is you want to go from 50 people to 500 people to 5,000 people. You want to propagate like the energy out, and you pick some people largely at the beginning who are already who are going to help you understand the culture today, the behaviors we want more of. And then and a lot of times initially you can get the strategy right with a smaller group and then enroll the 50 people because they're the ones to help you spread the behaviors. And it's a change management approach. I learned this in the Katzenbach Center at PwC, where first you enroll 50 people who help shape the system of change to drive behavior adoption.
Yeah.
And then they impact other people because these are the people that other people draw energy from. So you want 50 people who others listen to and influence others and exhibit the behaviors today. You carefully pick these people to enroll in showcasing the behaviors, training others, shaping the system of change, becoming coaches. And then you have people go through habit building where the initial 50 people act as coaches to the other people. The numbers are not magic. It could be 5 instead of 50, but I did one company, I built a 5,000 person movement, which built 100 million quantified impact. We picked quality management as the discipline to focus on for customer experience. And we basically enrolled the first 50 people, and then we grew it to 5,000 people through the movement. And we were able to quantify $100 million of impact from quality management because of this movement.
So it's like once you figure out how to clone the culture, it's actually the scaling happens on the individual level where there's more cultural congruency that threads down the company, and that's why it can scale because the bubble keeps expanding both on the customer and the employee side. That's so interesting. I never thought about it this way. That it's
the most important thing is to scale impact of any strategy or change effort is to find a way to get meaningful adoption of the behavior. And it's not just that it's lots of people adopting it lots of the time, but it has to be meaningful to them and land with them emotionally. And often they see the connection to the customer emotions, and they see the connection to the employee, their own emotions and the other employee. And then it becomes self-perpetuating because they draw energy from it. They feel good about it. And I think if you focus on behaviors that get you the emotions, here's the amazing thing about this. The emotions, once you get those 3 to 4 emotions right, it has double the statistical fit with business outcomes than the Net Promoter Score. So instead of just chasing survey scores, you're actually focusing on making everyone feel better. The customers, employee, it's actually good business. That if you understand the right emotions you want, and you systematically design, it doesn't have to be rocket science. Design an experience collage that delivers sharing and meaning and community in meaningful ways, and you get the right behaviors that will evoke those 3 or 4 emotions consistently. And think of it like a bell curve. The people on the right-hand side of the bell curve do more of the behaviors more of the time. The ones in the middle do the behaviors some of the time, some of the behaviors some of the time. You want to shift that curve so more people do more of the behaviors more of the time. Well, if you don't know what the behaviors are that you want, if you stop at values or you stop at purpose, or strategy, and you don't drive it down to what behaviors do I want and emotions do I want, then how are you going to get more of them? Right? You need to know what the emotions are that you want. That's your North Star. I want my brand. This is the intersection of brand and customer experience and employee experience. What emotions do you want the customers to feel? And then you want your employees to be proud about making them feel that way. And then you have to focus on the behaviors your employees have to engage in, and and focus your change management efforts on getting those behaviors. And that's the job of leaders, is to design the system of change, both formal and informal mechanisms. Formal is things like performance reviews, performance metrics, things like processes. Informal is like norms, symbolic acts, building relationship networks, shifting people's mindsets. These are informal. And startups are really good at managing the informal. Visionary founders are really good at the informal. When you get to really big companies, unfortunately, they massively overrotate on the formal stuff. When the informal is often, I learned this from John Katzenbach, the informal is often more important than the formal for culture. You need both. I'm not saying formal is not important, but informal is there whether you want it or not. And if you understand how to get as a leader, how to design a system of change and collaborate on habit adoption, you can have a massive impact.
It's interesting. It seems one is important, the other one is urgent, almost in a way, where it's like, if I have like Patrick Bet-David, the founder of Valuetainment, he's one of the big podcasters in the world right now, and he has a great talk on YouTube about what the culture needs to be in the creation of the company. And he warned about the idea of having early stage founders who are not prophetically minded, who don't believe in the vision, who have pessimism in a way. And that's like one of the things I also saw in. Have you read Endurance by Ernest Shackleton? Beautiful, best leadership book ever written. You have to write a review on that. He's this guy who raises money.
What's the name of the person again?
Ernest Shackleton, Endurance. It's a story about an Arctic explorer who fails with his mission, and then they have a shipwreck, and he gets his crew across the Arctic pretty much, finds a different boat there, and comes back without losing a single man. And one of the things he's so mindful about is the language of his team and the seeds of pessimism and attending it where it goes. Speaking of good leadership, what is bad leadership? Give us parameters for firing an executive. Because I think like one of the things that I'm often coming about is where people really miscast the most important members in their culture. And it's that's what I love about your story. Even like in your early setups, you had people who believed in you and who initiated you into the leadership journey. I think one of the good ways you can sabotage that is by having the wrong people around you.
I think, clearly you want a culture that's well understood, and you want people that are a good fit for the culture. So a bad leader is somebody who actually exhibits behaviors that are at odds with your culture, once you've defined the behaviors you want, a leader should be walking the talk, should be demonstrating that through storytelling, through symbolic acts, through mentoring, through coaching. A leader, so you want a leader who helps reinforce your culture and takes ownership of co-developing it and reinforcing it with other leaders. I think a leader is somebody who is other-oriented and not self-oriented. This is why I love Simon Sinek so much. Leaders eat last. Leader cares about other people. I think a leader is somebody who is able to balance long and short term, like higher ground and lower ground thinking, right? That's important to leadership. I think a leader is somebody who is able to inspire change and help translate knowing to doing. They don't just inspire it, but they can help do. If you're a leader and you don't help do, you're not a leader, you're a thinker. You have to be a doer, not just a thinker. So I think the best leaders are ones who actually, I probably could have started with this. The best leaders are the ones who hire the right people and develop people well. That's the most force multiplying thing. If they hire the right people and they're good coaches and developers and they care for their teams, then they're really good and they exemplify the right behaviors and they explicitly focus on that. They own the culture with others and help evolve it.
Any story from your life where you didn't possess this treasure trove of information about what good and bad leaders is, where a bad leader you were working with caused harm that led to some scar tissue of yours? Any stories in this regard?
You know, I apologize. I do need to run. We're after 1 and I have to get to meet some friends.
Wonderful, wonderful. Are we already at 3 hours already?
Yeah. Can you believe it?
I can't believe that. Okay. Do we have 5 more minutes for the last part?
Yeah, if it's just a few more minutes, because my wife's waiting to take me to go somewhere together.
Wonderful. I will shut up now. Okay, let's come to the last part of the interview where we, it's just a rapid fire question where we fade out pretty much away. And thanks so much for being mindful of this. Okay, future. I call this Ezekiel questionnaire because there's an ancient story in the Biblical Testament where there's a person who has this idea of like speaking some life into the great people of the past so that they can serve again in the future. And that's the theme of the company we are building, which is to use artificial intelligence to create a timeless catalog of advisory for leaders so they never die. So a couple of questions for this. 3 books you feel every leader should read.
Thinking Fast and Slow by Danny Kahneman, How Customers Think by Jerry Zaltman, and Atomic Habits by James Clear. By the way, all of them I have book reviews of all 3 on my website.
I'll put a link to it. Your board of advisory, if you could resurrect any people from history or recruit anybody who's alive, 5 people.
Gandhi, Winston Churchill, Martin Luther King, Confucius, Peter Drucker, and Abraham Lincoln.
Who's the Michael Jordan of leadership, if you had to name one of history?
Simon Sinek.
If you, last 2 questions, 3 questions, then I'm going to shut up. If you could address all the world leaders today, what message would you give them? And they would listen.
It's a rational thing to focus on emotion.
Last question. If this podcast were the only piece of your journey to survive the test of time, what would be a message you would choose to preserve for future generations? And then I'll share.
The best pathway to create value for an enterprise and society is to create emotionally engaging experiences for customers and employees.
You've supported me on this journey. How can I and listeners support you on yours? And where do we find you?
Well, you can go to www.cxandcultureconnection.com for more about my book and podcast. You can connect with me as Matthew Egol on LinkedIn. Or you can go to Journey Spark Consulting, the website, and contact us. Emails all come to me too. So your question was where can they find me? Was there anything else?
The last question is like you've were so generous with your time and attention and helped us.
What can you do?
How can we help you? What is like opportunity that we
what I would love to see is that leaders collaborate more. I'm part of a community called cxontherocks.com. Check it out. If it's a good fit for you, I'd love to have you join the community. It'd be an opportunity for us to collaborate. I act as the culture coach for this community.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay.
That's it from us. Thank you so much for showing up today. hope to.
I look forward. I look forward to continuing the conversation together. Have a wonderful weekend. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks so much. See you.
Take care.